There is a version of The Simpsons that most people have never watched. Not because it is hidden, not because it requires some special access or a collector's edition DVD set or a deep knowledge of the show's production history. It is hiding in plain sight, inside every episode, in the background, at the edges of the frame, just past where Homer is standing, or just behind the booth where the Simpsons family is sitting at a restaurant that the writers named but never thought anyone would examine too closely. The Simpsons has been on the air since December 17th, 1989, 36 seasons, 788 episodes. And for all of that time, the conversation about the show has revolved almost entirely around the family at its center: Homer, Marge, Bart, Lisa, Maggie, and to a lesser extent the recurring characters who orbit them: Burns, Smithers, Flanders, Skinner. The characters with names, the characters with speaking lines, the characters whose storylines get tracked and analyzed and theorized about. But here is the thing. Springfield is not a small town. It has a population that the show has cited at various points as somewhere between 30,000 and several hundred thousand, depending on which episode you are watching and how much the writers cared about continuity that week. And while the main cast and supporting characters account for maybe 40 or 50 recurring faces, the streets of Springfield are populated by hundreds of others. Background characters, extras, the people standing at bus stops and sitting in diner booths and walking past the Simpson house and filling the pews at Springfield Community Church on Sunday morning. Most television shows treat these people as furniture. They exist to make the world feel populated. They have no names. They have no lives. They are there to fill space, and the production moves on. The Simpsons did something different. Over 36 years, the background of Springfield became its own ecosystem. Characters who were never meant to be anything more than visual filler developed histories, relationships, and storylines that the show never formally acknowledged, but never formally erased either. Fans noticed. They cataloged. They gave these people names before the writers gave them names. They identified patterns and recurring behaviors and hidden connections that the production team either planted deliberately or stumbled into through the sheer accumulated weight of 788 episodes of storytelling. And what they found when they looked closely at the background of Springfield is one of the strangest and most quietly compelling mysteries in the history of American television. Let's start with the character that fans have come to call the squeaky-voiced teen. He appears in more episodes than most of the show's named supporting cast. He works, depending on the episode, at the Krusty Burger, the movie theater, the bowling alley, the roller rink, and at least 7 other Springfield establishments. He is perpetually in his mid-teens. He has the cracking, uncertain voice of someone balanced exactly on the edge between childhood and adulthood. And his defining characteristic, beyond the voice itself, is a kind of cheerful incompetence that never quite tips into malice. He is trying very hard. He is failing constantly. And he keeps showing up. Now, the surface explanation is simple. He is a recurring visual joke, a type. The teenager who works every bad job in town simultaneously because Springfield needs a teenage worker archetype, and he is it. But here is where it gets strange. The squeaky-voiced teen has appeared in situations that are mutually exclusive if you assume he is one person working a series of jobs. He has been shown working 2 different jobs simultaneously. He has appeared in the background of scenes that take place at the same moment, on opposite sides of town. In one episode, he is taking Homer's order at the Krusty Burger drive-thru. In the very next scene, which the show presents as happening at the same time, he is selling popcorn inside the Springfield movie theater. The show has never addressed this. The writers have never commented on it in any interview or DVD commentary that fans have been able to locate. The character just keeps appearing, in more places than a single human being can physically occupy, and Springfield doesn't notice. One theory that has developed in fan circles over several decades is that the squeaky-voiced teen is not one person. He is several. He is a family. Springfield has, at some point in its history, produced a generation of nearly identical teenagers who all share the voice, the posture, the nervous eagerness, and the willingness to work minimum-wage service jobs across the entire town. They are not twins or triplets. They are a phenomenon, a product of whatever Springfield puts in the water. And if you accept the radiation theory that underpins so much of the deeper Simpsons mythology, this makes a certain terrible sense. Environmental contamination does not always produce the kinds of dramatic mutations that you see in Blinky, the three-eyed fish. Sometimes it produces subtler effects. Sometimes it produces convergence. A population under sustained genetic stress can develop shared physical characteristics across unrelated families. The people of Springfield do not just share yellow skin and four-fingered hands. They share expressions, body types, vocal patterns. The squeaky-voiced teen is not a single person. He is a symptom. He is what happens when an entire generation of Springfield teenagers develops along the same mutated biological pathway. There are dozens of him. They all have the same voice because their vocal development was shaped by the same contaminated environment. They all work the same terrible jobs because the cognitive effects of that environment have narrowed their opportunities to the same handful of entry-level positions. They are not one character appearing in too many places. They are a population of nearly identical young men produced by a town that has been quietly doing this to its children for decades. The show does not tell you this, but it shows you the evidence, one background appearance at a time, across 36 years. Now let's talk about the Sea Captain. Captain McAllister, or Captain Horatio McAllister, depending on which piece of official Simpsons merchandise you consult, is one of the more prominent background characters in Springfield. He is a large, bearded man in a captain's uniform, who speaks in a broad maritime accent and whose catchphrase is a drawn-out exclamation that functions as his entire commentary on the universe. He runs a seafood restaurant called the Frying Dutchman. He owns what appears to be a working sailing vessel. He is, by the show's own internal logic, an actual sea captain operating in a landlocked town, or in a town that is landlocked in some episodes and oceanfront in others, because Springfield's geography is its own ongoing mystery. The sea captain appears at civic events, town meetings, public gatherings, and random Springfield streets with the same frequency as characters who have genuine narrative connections to the main cast. He has no clear relationship with any of the Simpsons. He has no obvious reason to be present at most of the events he attends. He simply materializes wherever the show needs him, delivers his line, and disappears back into the background. But here is the question that nobody quite asks about him. What is a sea captain doing in Springfield? Not metaphorically, practically. If Springfield is located in a state that does not reliably have ocean access, which is most of the states the show has implied Springfield might be in, then McAllister's entire professional identity does not make sense. He runs a seafood restaurant, which you can do anywhere. But he dresses, speaks, and carries himself as though he has spent decades at sea. He makes references to his sailing career. He has the kind of weathered certainty that comes from a life spent navigating actual water. The restaurant angle explains his presence in Springfield. He found a town, he set up shop, he made it work. But the deeper question is why he stayed. The sea captain gives every impression of being a man who belongs somewhere else. He is comfortable in Springfield the way a transplant is comfortable in a city that is not their home. He is functional. He is integrated. But there is always a distance in him, a sense that he is operating slightly outside the social fabric of the town rather than inside it. Fan theories about the sea captain tend to go in one of two directions. The first is sympathetic. He came to Springfield for a reason, perhaps decades ago, perhaps following a person or a loss or a professional setback that left him stranded inland. He built the restaurant because he needed an income. He kept the uniform and the accent and the maritime persona because those things were the last solid pieces of an identity that the rest of his life had dismantled. He is a man out of water in every sense, performing the role of captain because the alternative is confronting whatever he left behind when he sailed away from the sea. The second theory is darker and more interesting. The sea captain is not from Springfield. He was never meant to stay in Springfield. But he knows something about Springfield that makes leaving dangerous. Not for him, but for whoever might come looking for him. There are details in his background appearances, small things, the way he avoids certain areas of town, the way he occasionally seems to be watching rather than participating, that suggest a man maintaining a strategic distance, not running away from something, keeping himself positioned. The show has never told us where the sea captain came from before the Frying Dutchman. It has never explained how he acquired his vessel, how he sustains his business in a town where fresh seafood supply chains are not exactly obvious, or why he remains in Springfield decade after decade when he so clearly does not belong there. He is a background character. He is furniture. But he is furniture with a life that the show has never bothered to explain, and that fans have spent years trying to construct from the evidence available. There is a woman who appears in Springfield's background so frequently, and in such a specific emotional state, that she has become one of the most recognizable faces in the show's history. She is typically referred to as the Crazy Cat Lady. Her name, which the show eventually provided in a later season, is Eleanor Abernathy, and she is a doctor and a lawyer. Let that settle for a moment. The woman you have seen dozens of times in the background of Springfield scenes, the woman who screams at the sky and throws cats at passing strangers, the woman who seems to exist entirely outside the social functioning of her community, is a doctor. She holds a medical degree. She also holds a law degree. In a later episode, the show provides a brief flashback of her life before her breakdown, a life in which she was achieving at a level that placed her among the most professionally accomplished people in Springfield's history. The backstory goes like this. Eleanor Abernathy had a plan. She was going to be a doctor. She was going to be a lawyer. She was going to accomplish everything the world told women of her generation they could not accomplish. And she did. She got both degrees. She worked brutal hours. She sacrificed everything else. And when she finally arrived at the professional summit she had spent her life climbing toward, she found that it was hollow, that the work did not fill the spaces in her life that she had emptied to get there. And she responded to that hollowness the way the show depicts her responding to everything, by collapsing, by breaking, by retreating into a version of herself that Springfield streets could absorb without asking too many questions. The Crazy Cat Lady's backstory is one of the most quietly devastating things The Simpsons has ever produced, and the show drops it in a single episode, rings it for a laugh or two, and never returns to it. Eleanor Abernathy goes back to being a background presence. She goes back to throwing cats and screaming, and Springfield goes back to treating her as scenery. But the mystery is not really about her breakdown. The mystery is about what her presence in the background of Springfield tells us about the town itself. Here is a woman with 2 advanced degrees who is visibly mentally ill and visibly homeless, or, at minimum, living in conditions that no one in her community has intervened to improve. She is not getting treatment. She is not getting support. She is throwing cats at Homer Simpson, and nobody is calling for help on her behalf. Springfield has a hospital. It has a psychiatric facility. It has social services in some episodes and no recognizable civic infrastructure in others. But in every episode where Eleanor Abernathy appears, she appears alone, unsupported, and functioning only in the limited sense that she is still alive and still in possession of at least some of her cats. The question the show never asks is why. Why has Springfield allowed this to happen to a woman who, within living memory, was one of its most educated residents? Why has no one intervened? Why has the community, which in other episodes demonstrates a capacity for collective action so powerful that it can literally rebuild a neighbor's house in a single afternoon, not extended that capacity to the woman throwing cats at its residence? The radiation theory has an answer, and it is not a comfortable one. Eleanor Abernathy's breakdown was not just psychological, it was biological. The same contaminated environment that has damaged Homer's cognitive function, that has altered the physical appearance of every Springfield resident, that has been quietly dismantling neurological health across the entire community for decades, got to Eleanor Abernathy in a way that her exceptional intelligence could not armor her against. In fact, her intelligence may have made it worse. A mind capable of understanding what is happening to it is a mind capable of being driven to panic by that understanding. She is not the Crazy Cat Lady because she burned out from overwork. She is the Crazy Cat Lady because Springfield broke her, the same way Springfield is breaking everyone, more slowly, more quietly, but with equal inevitability. The show does not say this. The show plays her for laughs. But the evidence is there in the background of every scene she occupies, if you are paying attention. Then there is Disco Stu. Stuart Discotheque, to give him his full canonical name, is a man who has not updated his wardrobe or his musical preferences since approximately 1976. He wears a sequined leisure suit. He has elaborate hair. He speaks in the third person, always referring to himself as Disco Stu, which in itself is a behavioral quirk that would ordinarily trigger some degree of community concern. He is a regular presence at Springfield social events, and he has been portrayed at various times as a car salesman, a dance instructor, and simply as a man who attends things. Disco Stu is played as a joke about cultural stagnation. He is the punchline to every observation about people who got stuck in a particular era and never moved on. He is a relic, a man who committed to a moment in time and refused to let it go. But the mystery of Disco Stew is not about his taste in music. It is about his age. The show has never formally established how old Disco Stew is, but if he was genuinely a product of the disco era, if he came of age in the mid to late 1970s and made his commitment to that aesthetic at the peak of its cultural relevance, then he would have been in his teens or 20s during that period. That would make him, depending on which end of the age range you assign him, somewhere between his late 50s and his mid-70s in a present-day episode. And Disco Stew does not look that old. He does not carry himself like a man in his 60s or 70s. He has the energy, the posture, and the basic physical functionality of someone significantly younger, which raises the same question that Burns's impossible lifespan raises, just on a smaller, less dramatic scale. What is in Springfield's water? What is happening to the aging process in this town that allows a man who should be elderly to move through the world as though decades have not passed? The comfortable answer is that it is a cartoon, and cartoon characters do not age realistically, and there is no deeper meaning here. But the squeaky voice teen theory suggests that Springfield does not produce just one of anything. It produces types. It produces convergent phenotypes. And Disco Stew is a type 2, a type of Springfield man who exists suspended in a particular moment, unable or unwilling to move forward. Springfield is full of people like this. People who are frozen. People who have found a cultural or emotional moment and lock themselves inside it, refusing to let time do what time normally does to human beings. Homer's coma, if it is real, has frozen the entire town. The radiation, if the theory holds, has frozen its biology. But Disco Stew suggests that the freezing is not just physical or neurological, it is cultural. Springfield has a way of trapping people in the moment they arrived, whatever that moment happened to be. He came to Springfield during the disco era. He stopped updating when he got there, and now he is a sequined relic haunting the edges of a town that has been freezing its residents in place for 36 years. There is one more background character worth examining in detail, and he is perhaps the most disturbing of all. He is the man that fans have named Database, a child who appears at Springfield Elementary as a classmate of Bart and Lisa, and who seems to function as the school's unofficial record keeper. He knows things. He references facts with a precision that implies either excellent memory or access to information sources that other Springfield children do not have. He has appeared in enough episodes and contributed enough material to background scenes that fan catalogers have assembled a fairly detailed profile of his behavior. Database, real name probably Doug if we are going by canonical hints, is a child who is always watching. He is the kid in the corner of every classroom scene who is paying closer attention than anyone else. He is the student at every school event who is positioned near an exit, as though maintaining awareness of egress routes. He is the background figure who appears in episodes involving Springfield's most dangerous or sensitive situations, at the nuclear plant's open house, at the town hall meetings, at the courthouse steps when Springfield is processing some civic crisis. He is a child. He should not be at most of these events, and yet there he is. The fan theory that has developed around Database is straightforward and genuinely unsettling. Database is gathering information. He has been gathering it for years. He is not a passive background presence. He is an active observer who has made himself invisible by being consistently categorized as unremarkable. He is the child version of the strategy that the Maggie theory suggests Maggie herself has adopted, which is that invisibility is a form of power. The difference is that Maggie's silence appears to serve protective or at minimum strategic purposes. Database's observation feels like something else. It feels like preparation. Preparation for what, the show never says. Because the show does not acknowledge him as a character with intentions. He is background furniture, he is always there. And nobody in Springfield ever asks why a middle school-aged child keeps showing up at the most significant events in the town's civic life, watching, noting, cataloging. Maybe it is nothing. Maybe he is a visual gag about nerd culture. Maybe the show's animators just liked his design and dropped him in wherever they needed a child. But here is the thing about The Simpsons. Over 36 years, the show has demonstrated again and again that its background details are not always accidental. That the people in the margins of Springfield have stories, even when the show never formally tells them. Eleanor Abernathy was furniture until she was not. The squeaky-voiced teen was a joke until you noticed there were too many of him. The sea captain is still a joke to most viewers, but to the ones who have looked, he is a man with a past that Springfield did not create and may not be fully aware of. Database is still background furniture, for now. The background of Springfield is not empty, it is not set dressing. It is an entire secondary world populated by characters who have been accumulating context and history for 3 decades, building up detail the way sediment builds up over time, slowly, patiently, until what was once nothing becomes something that can bear weight. Every episode adds another layer. Every background appearance is another data point in a portrait that nobody ever sat down to paint deliberately, but that has been assembling itself anyway, one frame at a time. For 788 episodes, the people at the edges of Springfield are not less real than the people at the center. They are just less visible. And visibility, as The Simpsons has been quietly arguing for 36 years, is not the same thing as significance. Springfield is full of people you have never looked at directly. Tonight, close your eyes and think about what they might be doing. In the background, just past the edge of the frame, in the spaces where the camera never quite reaches, they are there. They have always been there, and they are not, as far as anyone can tell, entirely fine. If you are settling in for the night, drop a comment with your time and where you are watching from. And if you want to keep going deeper into Springfield, subscribing means you will be there for every one of these. The background of Springfield has one more character who deserves extended attention before we move on, and she is perhaps the most overlooked figure in the show's entire visual vocabulary. She appears in the earliest seasons of the show and then gradually recedes as the cast expands and the production's attention shifts to established favorites. She is the woman who is always at the bus stop. Not a named character, not a figure with a canonical story. Just a woman, present at a specific location in Springfield's geography, with the kind of consistency that suggests she is there not by accident, but by design, and not the design of the production, but by her own. She waits. The bus comes in some episodes and does not come in others. Springfield's transit system is, like everything else in the town, only episodically functional. But she is at the stop regardless. She is there whether the bus is coming or not. And there is something in the constancy of her presence that, once you have noticed it, becomes impossible to unnotice. The show's background characters, when they appear in sufficient frequency, create a portrait of Springfield's ordinary life that is distinct from, and sometimes more revealing than the story the main cast tells. The main cast tells Springfield's dramatic story. The background tells its daily story. The story of people going to work and waiting for buses, and sitting in diners, and moving through their days in the ways that most people move through most days, with no particular drama and no particular resolution, just the continuity of ordinary life in a specific place. Springfield's ordinary life is, when you look at it closely enough, not ordinary at all. The people moving through it are all slightly off. Not dramatically the way Homer or Burns or Krusty are dramatically off, but subtly, in the way that the show's visual style depicts as universal in Springfield, but that becomes strange when you remember that people from outside Springfield, guest characters and visitors, look fundamentally different, more regular, more average, more like the human baseline that Springfield's residents have drifted away from over decades of exposure to whatever Springfield has been doing to its people. The woman at the bus stop drifted too. You can see it in her design, in the proportions that are slightly wrong, in the ways that all Springfield proportions are slightly wrong. She is part of the mutation that the radiation theory identifies. She is part of the coma dream that Homer's subconscious populates with necessary supporting figures. She is part of the collective denial. A person who is simply there, accepting the conditions of her life with the same patient inattention that Springfield's collective psychology enables. She waits for a bus that may not come. She has probably been waiting since 1989, and in 36 years, nobody has asked her why, or where she is going, or whether the bus ever arrives. That is Springfield's background, in all its quiet strangeness, full of people who are waiting for something, none of them quite sure whether it is coming, all of them still there when the next episode begins. The cigarettes are significant. Patty and Selma smoke. They have always smoked. They smoke in the house, they smoke in the car, they smoke in environments where smoking is socially discouraged, they smoke in episodes where the ambient smokiness of their space is established as a fact of visiting their apartment. The cigarette is part of their visual identity, in the same way that Marge's hair is part of hers, a physical attribute that signals something about their relationship to the world. But the cigarettes are also a mystery in the specific context of Springfield's contaminated environment. Every Springfield resident is absorbing environmental toxins from the nuclear plant's runoff. Every resident is drinking contaminated water and breathing compromised air. Adding cigarette smoke to this existing burden should produce health outcomes that are, even by Springfield's already degraded standards, significantly worse than the average resident experiences. Patty and Selma have been smoking for 36 years, in a town with compromised air quality, in a job that keeps them behind a counter in a frequently stuffy government building, and they are functionally fine. Not healthy in any conventional sense, but functionally persistent, the way all Springfield residents are persistent. The same durability that allows Homer to survive injuries that should be fatal extends, in a milder form, to the Bouvier sisters. Springfield's mutation does not just affect its most dramatic characters. It runs through the entire population, including 2 women at a DMV counter who keep smoking without apparent consequence. Unless the consequence is already happening at the level the show does not depict, the interior health consequences that do not produce comedy, the things that do not show up until they show up dramatically, and by then the plot has moved on. The show has never addressed this directly. Patty and Selma's smoking is a character detail, not a health narrative. But in the context of everything else the show tells us about Springfield's environmental conditions, it adds a layer to the sisters' portrait that the comedy frame does not fully absorb. They are smoking on top of 36 years of environmental contamination, in a building that probably has its own air quality issues given the general state of Springfield's civic infrastructure, while maintaining a level of daily functional competence that puts most of Springfield's other characters to shame. Either the radiation has provided a paradoxical protective effect against other forms of carcinogen exposure, which is not as absurd as it sounds if you accept the show's premise that the plant's emissions have fundamentally altered the biology of everyone in range. Or the sisters are demonstrating a specific kind of Springfield toughness that extends beyond the physical, the same toughness that allows them to work at a government counter for 3 decades and maintain both their dignity and their capacity for sardonic commentary. The cigarettes are not just a character detail, they are evidence. They are Patty and Selma announcing to everyone who visits the DMV that they have made choices and they are standing behind them, that they are not available for management, that their bodies are their own even in a town that has been quietly claiming everyone's bodies for decades through its contaminated environment. It is, in its way, a form of resistance. Not the kind that produces change, the kind that produces survival. Sideshow Bob's attachment to opera, to Gilbert and Sullivan specifically, to classical literature, to what he calls and genuinely believes constitutes a higher form of human cultural expression, is not incidental to his character. It is the center of it, and the center of the central mystery about him. He believes that culture, specifically high culture, the culture of educated people and classical training and aesthetic refinement, is better than what Springfield provides. He believes this with a conviction that has not been shaken by 36 years of evidence that Springfield finds his conviction absurd. He sings Gilbert and Sullivan arias in circumstances where the music provides a window of escape that his intended victim uses to get away. He references Sideshow Bob's literary allusions in moments of high drama in ways that consistently undermine the drama, by introducing an aesthetic register that Springfield's residents cannot follow, and therefore cannot be intimidated by. His culture is, functionally, a liability in Springfield. It does not make him more dangerous. It makes him more predictable. The monologuing, the musical interludes, the literary references, all of them are patterns that Bart and the show's other characters have learned to exploit. The high cultural register that Bob believes distinguishes him is, in Springfield, the tell. The thing that reveals when a moment of genuine danger is being replaced by performance. And Bob knows this. He cannot stop it, because the high cultural response is wired into him as deeply as the violence and the resentment. But he knows it is happening. You can see this in the moments where the performance takes over, and something in Bob's expression suggests the awareness that it is happening again, that he is doing the thing, that the window is opening. The tragedy is that his culture is real. His love of opera is not performance. His engagement with literature is genuine. He is not an uneducated person pretending to sophistication. He is a genuinely sophisticated person who came to Springfield and found that his sophistication, far from being an advantage, is the most precise and most exploitable vulnerability he has. Springfield defeated Sideshow Bob not by being smarter than him, though Bart's specific kind of intelligence has repeatedly proven adequate to the challenge. It defeated him by being immune to the thing he values most. You cannot intimidate a town with opera. You cannot organize a successful criminal enterprise around Gilbert and Sullivan references. The culture Bob brought to Springfield has no leverage there, and it never will, because Springfield's aesthetic immune system is too robust and too indifferent to be penetrated by it. He will keep singing, he will keep quoting, he will keep being Sideshow Bob, and Springfield will keep stepping on rakes. There are several specific Ralph Wiggum lines that, examined outside the comedy context in which they are delivered, suggest something more than surrealist non sequitur. Ralph once told Bart that he ate a worm on a dare and the worm got angry. This is a quintessential Ralph line, physically impossible, presented with complete sincerity, functioning as comedy through its defiance of consensus reality. But here is the thing about Ralph's surrealist observations. They consistently have an interior logic that is accessible if you apply a framework other than conventional realism. The worm that got angry is, in the logic of a child who does not distinguish between his emotional experience and the world's emotional state, a perfectly accurate description of what happened. Ralph ate the worm. Ralph felt bad about this. The feeling bad took the form, in his experiential language, of the worm being angry. The sequence of events is factually incorrect in the way that most children's reporting of their emotional experiences is factually incorrect, but the underlying experience is communicated with clarity. Ralph is not disconnected from reality. He is translating his experience of reality into a language that the adults around him have not learned to read. His famous line about his cat's breath smelling like cat food is not surrealism. It is observation. His even more famous declaration that he is helping is, depending on the episode, either profound self-awareness or its opposite. Both readings work. Both readings say something about Ralph. The line that is most significant in the context of the Chief Wiggum theory is one that is easy to miss because the show delivers it quickly. Ralph has, in several episodes, demonstrated knowledge of police procedures, criminal case details, and civic administrative matters that a child his age would have no access to except through an adult with professional access to those things. His father. The information leaks from the professional life into the domestic life, in the way that information always leaks when the professional holds a position that makes compartmentalization genuinely difficult. Ralph absorbs this. He does not necessarily understand it in adult terms, but he stores it in the Ralph-specific translation that converts everything he experiences into Ralph language, and he produces it in contexts where it lands as comedy because nobody around him expects a child to have that information. He is a repository of Springfield's institutional secrets, stored in a format that no one knows how to read. That is either a profound protection or a profound waste, depending on whether anyone ever figures out how to decode him. Nobody has. The comedy is too comfortable, and Ralph keeps talking, in his language, about things that are exactly what they appear to be and also something else entirely. Groundskeeper Willie's relationship to his Scottish identity is itself a mystery that the show deploys for comedy without ever quite unpacking what it actually represents. He is Scottish in the way that cartoon characters are from places, absolutely unambiguously, with an accent and a diet and a cultural reference set that is performed at maximum intensity at all times. He makes references to haggis. He makes references to the Scottish Highlands. He makes references to cultural practices and social attitudes that position him as maximally foreign to Springfield's American context. This performance of foreignness is, the show implies, simply who Willie is. It is his personality. He is the Scottish groundskeeper. The Scottishness is not separate from his character. It is his character. But here is the thing about the performance of national identity at maximum intensity. It is almost always compensation for something. People who are secure in their cultural identity do not typically perform it at this volume. The performance suggests a relationship to the identity that is more anxious than comfortable, more defensive than settled. Willie is not a man who happens to be Scottish. He is a man who has made Scottishness his armor. And armor, in the psychology of The Simpsons, always protects something. What it protects, in Willie's case, is suggested by the backstory fragments the show provides across multiple episodes. The Scottishness is the one piece of his original life that he brought to Springfield intact. Everything else, Whatever profession he had, whatever relationships he maintained, whatever trajectory his life was on before it ended at the school's shack, is gone or inaccessible or too painful to reference directly. The Scottishness is the anchor, the identity that persists when everything else has been stripped away by whatever circumstances brought him to Springfield. He holds on to it the way you hold on to the one thing you were not willing to lose, loudly, aggressively, in a way that makes clear that this is not available for negotiation. And Springfield accepts it, because Springfield accepts whatever its residents present themselves as. It is a town that voted to sustain a false identity when the truth was standing in the same room. A Scottish groundskeeper who lives in a shack and maintains his cultural identity at maximum volume is, by Springfield standards, entirely manageable. Willie's shack has another layer worth examining. It is not just where he lives, it is what he has built. The shack, minimal and inadequate as it is, represents Willie's claim on a space in Springfield. It is his. Not in any legal sense, not in any sense that a property lawyer would recognize, but in the sense that matters in the social ecology of Springfield. It is the space that everyone in town accepts as Willie's. Nobody else sleeps in the shack. Nobody else claims it. It exists, in Springfield's consensus reality, as Willie's space. In a town that has voted to exile the truth and that maintains its social arrangements through collective agreement, the shack is the thing the collective has agreed is Willie's. And whatever else Springfield has failed to provide him, that agreement is real. It has held for 36 years. He is there. He will be there tomorrow. The shack is his, and Springfield knows it, and nobody is going to touch it. That is the closest thing to security that Springfield offers someone like Willie, and he has accepted it, with the specific Scottish brand of resignation that is not quite acceptance but that functions, over enough time, as the same thing. Crusty brand merchandise is a recurring element of the show that functions as comedy but that, examined carefully, reveals something disturbing about how Springfield's economic and regulatory systems operate. The products are consistently terrible, not just substandard, actively dangerous. Crusty brand products have injured, sickened, and in some cases nearly killed the Springfield children who use them. The merchandise consistently fails to meet basic consumer safety standards that, in any functional regulatory environment, would result in recalls, litigation, and the kind of institutional response that would remove the products from the market and potentially remove the brand from viability. None of that happens. The products remain available. The brand persists. Krusty keeps endorsing things that should not be endorsed, and Springfield's children keep consuming products that should not be consumed, and nothing in the town's regulatory apparatus intervenes. This is consistent with everything the show tells us about Springfield's regulatory capacity, which is minimal and selectively applied. But the Krusty brand problem has a specific dimension that the nuclear plant and the food safety and the environmental violations share. It is harmful to children, specifically to children. The people in Springfield who are most vulnerable, who have the least capacity to protect themselves through informed consumer choice, who depend on the adults and institutions in their environment to ensure that the things they consume are safe, are the people being systematically failed by the Krusty brand empire. Krusty's financial relationship with his merchandise reflects his deeper psychological relationship with it. He endorses things for money, takes the money, loses the money, and endorses more things. The cycle is self-sustaining and self-defeating simultaneously. He needs the endorsement income because his other revenue is consumed by gambling and vice. The endorsement income is generated by lending his face to products that are harmful to the children who admire him. The children who admire him are the source of the emotional sustenance that keeps him connected, however tenuously, to something that feels meaningful. He is monetizing the love that sustains him by lending that love to products that harm the people who give it. This is not a comfortable observation. The show wraps it in comedy and moves on. But it is there in the structure of the Krusty brand operation. Visible if you look at what the business model actually requires and what it actually does. Krusty knows this. The show has given him enough self-awareness in enough episodes to establish that he understands, at some level, what the Krusty brand represents. He is not unaware. He is simply unable to stop, because stopping would require refusing the income stream that keeps the performance going. And the performance cannot stop, because without it there is only Herschel, and Herschel does not know how to be enough. So, the products keep shipping, and the children keep getting hurt, and Krusty keeps cashing the checks. And Springfield keeps buying because the Krusty brand is part of their children's world, and children's worlds are made of brand relationships, and this is the brand Springfield has. It is the brand a town like Springfield deserves, in the specific way that institutions produce the leaders and the products commensurate with the conditions that shape them. Springfield's institutional environment has produced Krusty brand as surely as it has produced Homer Simpson. They are both outputs of the same system. They are both surviving as best they can within structures that have not designed survival for them specifically. They are, in ways that neither of them would easily articulate, the same kind of person. Homer and Krusty. Men who are mostly performance, and who chose the performance because the alternative was unbearable. Men whose deepest relationship is with a child who expects better of them than they have managed to provide. They are friends, in the casual Springfield sense. The show has depicted them as such across the run, and that friendship makes sense because they are the same portrait painted twice, with different colors and different specifics but the same underlying structure. The man who cannot be what he was supposed to be, living in a town that makes being anything else very difficult. There are two women in Springfield who have always known more than they let on. Patty and Selma Bouvier are Marge Simpson's older sisters. They appear in nearly every major episode of the show's run. They attend family dinners, holiday gatherings, and civic events. They are constants in the social fabric of the Simpson household in a way that places them somewhere between recurring supporting characters and fully realized members of the extended family. On the surface, they are a comedy duo built around a single concept. They are the aunts who love Marge and hate Homer. Everything about them is designed to express this dynamic. Their shared voice, their matching hairstyles, their identical fashion choices, their synchronized disdain for their brother-in-law. They are a unit, a matching set. You rarely think of one without the other. But when you spend real time with Patty and Selma across the full run of the show, something unusual begins to emerge. These two women, who are framed almost entirely as obstacles or comic foils, are consistently the most competent and most informed characters in every room they occupy. And the show knows this. The show has been quietly acknowledging this for 3 decades, without ever making it the explicit point of any episode. Let's start with where they work. Both Patty and Selma are employed at the Springfield Department of Motor Vehicles. This is the institution that controls every driver's license, every vehicle registration, every piece of motor vehicle documentation in the entire town. In any functional civic system, the DMV is a repository of personal information about every driving-age resident: names, addresses, physical descriptions, vehicle ownership records, the paper trail of daily life, the documentation of where people live and what they drive and how they present themselves to the state. Patty and Selma have worked at this institution for the entirety of the show's run. They were there in the first season. They are still there in the most recent episodes. They have watched every resident of Springfield come through their window and hand over their identity documentation. They have processed the records of every new resident who has moved to town. They have access to a database of personal information about Springfield's population that no private citizen should have, and that they have maintained for decades. The show treats this as a setup for jokes about slow government work and bureaucratic indifference. And that reading is not wrong. The DMV scenes are funny. Patty and Selma's cheerful malice toward the people in their lines is a consistent source of comedy. But the information angle is something else entirely. Consider what Patty and Selma actually know by virtue of their position. They know where every Springfield resident lives. They know what every Springfield resident drives. They know the documented physical description of every adult in town. They have processed, over 30-plus years, an archive of Springfield personal data that is both comprehensive and deeply intimate. A driver's license tells you more than people think. It tells you the face someone chose to present on a specific day. It tells you the address they wanted associated with their name. It tells you, if you read the renewal dates and the address changes, the rough shape of a person's life over time. When they moved, when they changed their appearance enough to get a new photo, when their address shifted in a direction that suggested domestic change, financial change, or something else. Patty and Selma have been reading these stories for 30 years. They are, functionally, the custodians of Springfield's most comprehensive personal archive. And here is the question that the show never asks. What have they done with it? The easy answer is nothing. They are background characters. They process licenses and make Homer's life difficult, and smoke cigarettes and watch their stories and go home. They are not scheming. They are not manipulating. But there are moments in the show's history where Patty and Selma demonstrate knowledge that they should not have. Casual references to facts about Springfield residents that go beyond what neighborly gossip could supply. Details about people's private lives that suggest either extraordinary social networks or access to records that the average Springfield resident does not have. The show deploys these moments for quick laughs and moves on. But they accumulate. Over 36 seasons, the moments where Patty or Selma knows something she should not know build into a pattern that is difficult to dismiss as coincidence. There is also the matter of their social lives, or the apparent lack thereof. Both women are repeatedly characterized as lonely. They want relationships. They have pursued relationships across dozens of episodes, with varying degrees of desperation and success. Selma's marriage history alone is one of the show's longer-running gags, encompassing Sideshow Bob, Troy McClure, Disco Stu briefly, and others. The relationships all fail. The comedy is consistent. Neither woman can hold on to a romantic partner, and the show frames this as their primary source of suffering. But consider what their romantic lives look like from a different angle. Every relationship they enter gives them access to a new sphere of private information. Sideshow Bob gave them a window into Springfield's criminal justice system and its most notorious criminal psychology. Troy McClure gave them an inside view of Springfield's entertainment industry and its most peculiar open secrets. The pattern is not about romance failing. The pattern is about what happens during the relationships, before they end. Patty and Selma consistently attach themselves to people at the center of Springfield's most significant social, professional, and occasionally criminal ecosystems. And when those relationships end, the women walk away with knowledge. The theory, which has circulated in Simpsons fan communities for years without ever achieving mainstream attention, is that Patty and Selma are not unlucky in love. They are deliberate. They choose their relationships based on strategic criteria that have nothing to do with emotional compatibility and everything to do with access. They are information gatherers. They have been gathering information for 30 years from the best possible institutional position. A government job that processes the identity documentation of every adult in town, supplemented by a series of intimate relationships with people who have access to the parts of Springfield that the DMV cannot see. What are they doing with it? The show never says. But here is what the show does tell us. They are fiercely protective of Marge. This is the constant. Through every season, through every episode, through all the ways that Patty and Selma are terrible to Homer and difficult to the Simpson children and unpleasant to most of Springfield's population, their relationship with Marge is consistent and genuine. They love their sister. They have always loved their sister. They would do almost anything to protect her. And here is the question that follows from that. What if everything they have been doing, the information gathering, the strategic relationships, the decades of quiet observation from behind a DMV window, what if all of it has been in Marge's service? What if Patty and Selma know something about Homer, or about Springfield, or about Burns, or about the larger system that surrounds the Simpson family, that they have been quietly assembling information to address? What if the two most underestimated women in Springfield have been the most prepared for something that the show has never quite brought itself to depict? Selma's relationships deserve much closer examination, because each one is stranger than the show's comic framing acknowledges. Her marriage to Sideshow Bob is the most immediately alarming. Sideshow Bob Terwilliger is a convicted criminal who attempted to murder Bart Simpson multiple times. He is a man with a documented history of violence, manipulation, and homicidal obsession. And Selma married him. The show presents this as a gag about Selma's desperation and Bob's manipulation, and on the surface that is exactly what it is. Bob was using her. He was a criminal who needed a cover identity. She was a lonely woman who wanted a husband. He deceived her. But Selma is not stupid. The show establishes this consistently. She is a government employee with 30-plus years of experience processing human behavior across a DMV counter. She has seen every kind of Springfield resident at their most honest and most desperate moments. The moments when they are trying to manage their identity documentation and cannot entirely hide who they are. She has a finely developed sense for people. How did she not see Bob? One answer is that she did see him, and she married him anyway. Not because she was fooled, but because she wanted something from the relationship that she got before it ended. Inside information about Springfield's criminal element, and the justice system's relationship to it, perhaps. A window into the world that produces people like Sideshow Bob, the world of privilege and resentment and violent intelligence that operates just below Springfield's respectable surface. She learned something from that marriage, something the show never formally articulates, and she took it with her when she left. Her relationship with Troy McClure is even more interesting when examined carefully. Troy McClure is a washed-up actor whose career in Springfield's entertainment ecosystem masks a personal life that the show describes obliquely and darkly. The famous line about Troy, delivered by Lionel Hutz, references a rumor about McClure's relationship with Fish, delivered as a throwaway joke about his personal peculiarities. The joke lands and the show moves on, but the implication that Troy McClure has some kind of stigmatizing secret about his personal life hangs in the air. Selma married Troy. She was inside his world. She saw whatever was there to be seen, and when she left, she took whatever she had learned with her. The pattern is not romantic failure. The pattern is reconnaissance. Now, let's look at Patty, because Patty's storyline is stranger in a different way. Patty's defining narrative arc in the show's later seasons involves her coming out as a lesbian. This is handled with varying degrees of grace across the episodes that address it, and it provides a retcon of sorts for her earlier characterization, explaining aspects of her personality and her relationship to Springfield's social norms that the show had previously left unexplored. But there is a moment in Patty's history that predates this revelation, and that becomes much more interesting when you read it through the lens of the information-gathering theory. For much of the show's early run, Patty is characterized as having a significant and persistent crush on MacGyver, the television character. She watches the show obsessively. She references it constantly. She uses it as her primary cultural touchstone. The writers play this for comic effect, the spinster aunt obsessed with an action hero, but there is something in Patty's relationship to MacGyver as a cultural object that hints at something more complex. MacGyver is a character defined by a specific skill. He takes whatever is available in his immediate environment and uses it to escape impossible situations. He is the master of turning limited resources into functional solutions. He never has the right tool. He always finds a way. Patty's fixation on this particular archetype, read through the theory of what she and Selma have been quietly building over 3 decades, is not accidental. She is drawn to a kind of intelligence that she has been practicing. The DMV is not the right tool for most things, but it is the tool Patty has, and she has been doing MacGyver things with it for 30 years. There is also the question of Patty and Selma's apartment. The show has depicted their living space across dozens of episodes, and it shares certain consistent characteristics. There are references, mostly visual, to an extraordinary quantity of documentation in the sisters' home. Files, folders, accumulated paper. The show treats these as evidence of their bureaucratic personalities, their inability to separate work from home life. But the sheer volume of physical documentation in their apartment goes beyond what 2 DMV employees would bring home from work. It suggests record-keeping of a personal and extensive nature. What are they keeping records of? The show never provides an inventory, but the visual evidence across many episodes points to women who are not merely processing paperwork at work and leaving it there. They are maintaining something at home, something organized, something that has been building for a long time. The Bouvier family history adds another layer to all of this. The show has revealed, across various episodes, that the Bouvier family has a more complicated past than Marge's cheerful domesticity or Patty and Selma's bureaucratic existence would suggest. Their mother, Jacqueline Bouvier, is a woman with depths that the show occasionally surfaces before submerging again. The family has connections, social and otherwise, that place them at certain key historical moments in Springfield's civic life. They are not outsiders looking in. They are old Springfield, in the sense that they have been present for the town's development in ways that the Simpson family, as relative newcomers, have not been. Patty and Selma inherited something from their family's history in Springfield. Not money, not status. Institutional knowledge. The kind of understanding that comes from being in a town long enough to see its cycles repeat, to see the same dynamics play out across different generations, to recognize the patterns that newer residents keep discovering for the first time. They are the memory of Springfield in a way that most residents are not. And memory, in a town that has been systematically erasing its own history for 36 years, is a form of power that should not be underestimated. The show has teased, on multiple occasions, at a version of Patty and Selma that goes further than the comedy allows. There are episodes where one or both of them demonstrates a knowledge of Springfield's inner workings that the show frames as convenience, but that could just as easily be explained by 30 years of careful, deliberate attention. There are moments where their advice to Marge, delivered in their characteristic flat cigarette-adjacent tone, turns out to be precisely correct in ways that suggest foresight rather than instinct. They warned Marge about Homer, not just generally, specifically, repeatedly, in ways that proved accurate. Now, the standard reading of this is that they are difficult women who dislike their brother-in-law and who occasionally get lucky when their criticisms turn out to be founded. But there is another reading. They have been watching Homer Simpson for the entirety of his relationship with their sister. They have run his name through the DMV records, cross-referenced his history, tracked the ways his decisions and behavior patterns have developed over decades, and they have been drawing conclusions from that data all along. When they warn Marge, they are not guessing, they are reporting. The tragedy embedded in this theory, if it holds, is that all of their preparation, all of their information gathering, all of their quiet cultivation of institutional knowledge across 3 decades of DMV service and strategic relationships has not been able to protect Marge from anything. She is still married to Homer. Homer is still Homer. The system that the sisters understand better than anyone else in the Simpson family is still the same system, still serving the same interests, still operating the way it has always operated. Patty and Selma may be the most knowledgeable women in Springfield, but knowledge is not the same as power. And power in Springfield belongs to one person and one institution, the way it always has. What they know, they know. What they can do with what they know has always been constrained by the same forces that constrain everyone else in town. Except that they are still here, still working, still watching from behind that DMV window, still accumulating. Whatever Patty and Selma have been building over 36 years is not finished. The show has 36 seasons of evidence that these two women have not yet played whatever hand they have been assembling. And if the information gathering theory is correct, that hand is substantial. Springfield should be paying closer attention to the two women at the DMV counter. It never has. And that, in a town that thrives on collective inattention, might be exactly the point. Robert Underdunk Terwilliger Jr. has tried to kill a 10-year-old child so many times that the show lost count. He has framed his former employer for armed robbery. He has rigged a mayoral election. He has attempted to blow up the entire city of Springfield with a nuclear weapon. He has stabbed a man. He has orchestrated an elaborate murder scheme involving an opera's performance in Italy. He has returned to Springfield, been arrested, escaped, returned again, been arrested again, escaped again, in a cycle that has been playing out since the show's very first season and that has never been definitively resolved. Sideshow Bob is the show's most committed villain. He is also, depending on which episode you are watching, its most sympathetic character. And the real mystery of Sideshow Bob is not whether he will finally kill Bart Simpson. The real mystery is why, in 36 years, he has never actually done it. Not because he lacks the intelligence. Sideshow Bob is, by any measure, the most intelligent character in Springfield. He is a Yale-educated, opera-singing, classical literature-quoting polymath who has repeatedly demonstrated the ability to plan and execute schemes of extraordinary complexity. He has outsmarted federal agents. He has outmaneuvered the legal system. He has, on multiple occasions, placed Bart Simpson in situations where Bart's death was essentially inevitable, and something has gone wrong each time. The rake scene is the most famous example. Bob steps on a rake. He is struck in the face. He steps on another rake. He is struck in the face again. He steps on more rakes, sequentially, in a bit that runs for so long that it crosses from comedy into something else, into the territory of a man being systematically prevented from doing what he intends to do by an environment that seems to be conspiring against him. The rake scene is played as comedy, but underneath the comedy is a question: what is actually stopping Sideshow Bob? The fan theory that has never quite received the attention it deserves frames this question in a very specific way. Sideshow Bob does not fail because he is incompetent. He does not fail because Bart is cleverer than him, though Bart is more resourceful than he appears. He fails because he is psychologically incapable of completing the act, and the rakes and the musical numbers and the elaborate monologues are not obstacles. They are delay tactics his own subconscious has constructed to prevent him from reaching a conclusion he claims to want but cannot actually bring himself to reach. Sideshow Bob does not want to kill Bart Simpson. This is the central claim, and it sounds absurd given the decades of evidence to the contrary. But look at the actual sequence of events in any episode where Bob has Bart within his reach. He monologues. He explains himself. He references Gilbert and Sullivan. He creates windows of escape that a child of average intelligence could navigate. He positions himself in circumstances where external factors, rakes, arriving police, Bart's ingenuity, the intervention of some third party, can prevent the final act without Bob having to make a decision. He is, by any objective analysis, not trying hard enough, and the reason why is embedded in the nature of their relationship, which is one of the strangest and most genuinely complex relationships in the history of animated television. Sideshow Bob's entire personality, his entire sense of self, his entire reason for existence in the psychological sense, is organized around Bart Simpson. Without Bart, Bob has nothing to be. He is the man who almost killed Bart. He is the man who is trying to kill Bart. He is the man whose genius is measured against the continuing survival of a 10-year-old. Remove Bart from the equation and Sideshow Bob loses the structure that gives his life meaning. If he actually killed Bart Simpson, he would have to become someone else. And the evidence of the show suggests that the person he would have to become after that is someone he does not know how to be and is not prepared to encounter. There is a scene in the episode where Bob and Bart are stranded together on a deserted island, forced into something like coexistence, and what emerges from it is a relationship that the show depicts as oddly tender. Bob is, when not in murder mode, excellent company. He is knowledgeable and genuinely interested in sharing that knowledge. He engages with Bart as an intellectual equal, in a way that nobody else in Bart's life quite does. Lisa does, but Lisa's intellectual engagement is pedagogical. She is teaching. Bob is conversing. There is a difference. The Bob-Bart dynamic on that island, stripped of the murder framework, resembles something like mentorship, an uneasy, inappropriate, technically involuntary mentorship between a grown man and a child, but mentorship nonetheless. Bob sees something in Bart that he responds to genuinely, and whatever that something is, it is the real reason he cannot close the distance between intent and action. Bob's backstory compounds this reading in ways that the show addresses across multiple episodes. The Terwilliger family, as introduced in a later season, is Springfield's equivalent of a dynasty of academic and artistic achievement. Bob's father is a patrician figure. His brother Cecil, played as Bob's psychological inverse, is someone who channels his resentment of Bob in equally elaborate directions. The family is educated, culturally sophisticated, and deeply, almost generationally, invested in the idea of its own distinction. Bob was raised in an environment that treated intelligence and cultural attainment as the highest possible values. He was shaped, from childhood, by a worldview that divided people into those who appreciated art, literature, music, the life of the mind, and those who did not. And Springfield, when he arrived at it as Krusty's sidekick, was populated almost entirely by the second category. Krusty's show was the defining institution of Bob's early adult life in Springfield. He was there as the straight man, the educated foil to Krusty's crude comedy. And every day on that set was, for Bob, a form of humiliation. Not because Krusty was cruel to him, because Krusty's entire universe, the seltzer bottles and the pratfalls and the pie-in-the-face comedy of it all, represented the exact opposite of everything Bob had been raised to value. He was surrounded by vulgarity and asked to enable it professionally. He was the most educated person in the room and treated as the least important. Framing Krusty for armed robbery was not purely mercenary. It was an act of class rage. It was a man who had been told all his life that taste and intelligence were the highest virtues, finding himself subordinated to a man who had neither, and retaliating in the most devastating way available to him. The problem with this reading is that Bart Simpson was the person who exposed him. Not an adult, not a detective, not someone with institutional resources or a natural authority advantage over Bob. A 10-year-old child who noticed something that all of Springfield's adults had missed. And the thing Bart noticed was not a complicated thing. It was a simple observation about how a left-handed man holds a gun. Bob was undone by the kind of attention that children sometimes pay to the physical world, the careful noticing of small physical details that adults train themselves to stop seeing. And this humiliation, being caught by a child, being unmasked by the person in the room with the least formal power, sits at the center of everything that follows. Bob cannot kill Bart because killing Bart would mean forever being the man who was so threatened by a child that he responded with murder. The relationship is not about hate. It is about something much more uncomfortable. Bob's awareness that Bart Simpson, despite everything, is the person in his life who has engaged with him most fully and most honestly. Everyone else in Springfield either fears Bob or dismisses him. Bart does neither. Bart treats Bob as a genuine adversary, which is the closest thing to respect that Sideshow Bob receives from anyone. The Sisyphean structure of their relationship, the cycles of capture and escape and return and attempt, has been running for so long that it has become a kind of grammar, a language. Both of them speak it fluently. Bob attempts, Bart survives, Bob is captured. Bob escapes, Bob attempts again, and in the space between attempts they are both waiting for the next episode of whatever this relationship is. It is the most honest relationship in either of their lives. And that is the saddest and strangest thing about it. Now let's examine the mechanics of Bob's escapes, because they are themselves a mystery. Bob has been imprisoned in Springfield's correctional system multiple times. He has also escaped multiple times. The escapes are played as a given, a fact of Springfield life, like the power plant in Krusty's show. Bob goes to jail. Bob gets out. The cycle continues. The show does not invest much energy in explaining how Bob gets out, beyond the occasional parole hearing scene where he manipulates the board through charm and an apparently sincere commitment to reform that everyone in the audience knows is performance. But the parole board scenes are interesting precisely because they reveal something about how Springfield's institutional systems work. Bob walks into those hearings as a convicted criminal with a documented history of repeat offenses, and he walks out repeatedly with his freedom. This is not a realistic depiction of how parole works. It is something else. It is a depiction of a system that can be navigated by someone with Bob's combination of intelligence, cultural sophistication, and what can only be described as old-money social fluency. Bob knows how to present himself to institutional authority. He knows the language that parole boards respond to, the vocabulary of remorse and rehabilitation and civic reintegration. He speaks it perfectly because he was raised in a class that treats institutional authority with the kind of strategic deference that produces favorable outcomes. He does not rage against the system, he works it. He gives it what it wants to see, and it rewards him with what he wants to have. This is itself a commentary on how Springfield's justice system operates, on how all justice systems operate, but the show deploys it as setup for the next Bart hunting arc rather than as the genuine critique it contains. There is also the matter of what happens to Springfield when Bob is not there. The show has demonstrated, on multiple occasions, that Springfield's relationship to Bob is more complex than simple fear or outrage. There are Springfield residents who admire Bob. There are people who voted for him when he ran for mayor, and not just because the election was rigged. His rhetoric about improving Springfield's culture resonated with some segment of the population. There are moments where the town treats his arrest as a loss of something rather than a resolution of something. This is consistent with everything the show has built about the Terwilliger family and their class position in Springfield. Bob is not a random criminal. He is a man from a family with social capital in Springfield, the kind of capital that survives imprisonment and multiple conviction records because it is invested in networks and relationships that the legal system does not touch. The Terwilligers have standing, and that standing is what makes Bob's repeated returns possible, not just his own cleverness, but the institutional goodwill that his family's position preserves for him even at his lowest points. Cecile's storyline, when the show introduces Bob's brother as a character who has spent his entire adult life trying to either match or undermine Bob's notoriety, deepens all of this. The sibling dynamic between the two Terwilliger brothers is its own thesis about how family inheritance works. Both of them were shaped by the same upbringing. Both of them internalized the same values. Both of them have spent their adult lives trying to distinguish themselves from the other. And both of them have, in the process, done genuinely terrible things while maintaining the self-perception of cultural superiority that their upbringing provided. They are Springfield's aristocracy of resentment. Men with every advantage who feel themselves wronged and who channel that feeling into increasingly elaborate acts of retribution against targets that, when you step back and look, are almost always smaller than they are. Bart Simpson is 10 years old and has no institutional power and no family resources that extend beyond a working-class house on Evergreen Terrace. And he has defeated Bob every time. There is a version of this story where Sideshow Bob is the tragedy, not because he is sympathetic, exactly, but because the gap between what he believes himself to be and what he has actually become is so profound that it constitutes a kind of ruin. He is a Yale-educated polymath who has devoted the defining years of his adult life to attempting to murder a child and failing, repeatedly, in ways that have made him famous for exactly the wrong reasons. He is exactly what his family's upbringing produced. A man who believes his intelligence and taste entitle him to something, channeled into a quest that produces nothing but more time in a Springfield prison cell. The rake scene, the musical numbers, the elaborate escape from circumstances that should produce death. All of it is Bob filling the time in the only way he knows how, with performance, with style, with the outward trappings of cultural distinction, because those are the only tools he was ever actually given. He does not want to kill Bart. He wants to matter. And the tragedy is that Bart is the only person in Springfield who has ever made him feel like he does. The final piece of the Bob mystery is his continued existence in Springfield after so many attempts and so many imprisonments. Other fictional criminals would have been transferred, executed, or simply removed from the narrative. Bob keeps coming back. The town keeps absorbing him. The system keeps releasing him. And Bart keeps being 10 years old when he returns, which means the dynamic can never resolve, which means Bob can never truly win, which means the only thing he can do is keep trying, keep attempting, keep stepping on rakes. He is trapped in the same loop as everyone else in Springfield. The difference is that Bob, with all his intelligence and all his cultural sophistication and all his genuine capacity for something better, knows he is trapped. That awareness, the awareness of the loop without the ability to escape it, is the thing that makes Sideshow Bob the most tragic figure in a show that is full of tragic figures wearing comedy as armor. He knows what he is doing. He knows why it does not work. He keeps doing it anyway. Because in Springfield, the only thing worse than being trapped is being the one person in the trap who understands the mechanism. There is a man who stands between Springfield and justice. His name is Clancy Wiggum. He is the chief of police. He has held that position for 36 years without a single internal review, a single meaningful accountability hearing, or a single episode in which his continued employment in that role is treated as the civic catastrophe it demonstrably is. Chief Wiggum is one of the most beloved recurring characters in The Simpsons. His incompetence is a constant source of comedy. His eating habits are legendary. His relationship with his son Ralph, who may be the show's most genuinely mysterious child, provides some of the warmest and most absurd moments in the series. He is funny. He is endearing in a specific way that terrible people in positions of power sometimes are endearing, which is to say that his awfulness is so thorough and so consistent that it takes on a kind of magnificence. But underneath the magnificence is something that the show has been quietly building for 36 years. A portrait of a thoroughly corrupt institutional culture that explains more about how Springfield actually functions than almost anything else in the show's canon. Let's start with what we know for certain about Clancy Wiggum's professional record. He has failed to solve every major crime that has occurred in Springfield during his tenure. This is not a minor claim. Springfield has experienced gun violence, arson, attempted murder, successful murder in some episodes, financial fraud on a civic scale, environmental crimes that by any standard would trigger federal investigation, a staged election, multiple prison breaks, and the attempted destruction of the entire city on at least one occasion. Chief Wiggum was the lead investigator on many of these cases. He solved exactly none of them through the application of competent police work. The solutions to Springfield's crimes come, when they come at all, from outside sources, from Homer stumbling into the truth, from Bart's accidental investigations, from Lisa's methodical reasoning, from guest characters who bring external competence into a situation that Springfield's own institutional resources have thoroughly failed. Wiggum is not just bad at his job. He is bad at it in a way that consistently produces outcomes favorable to the most powerful person in Springfield. Consider the Burns episodes where Wiggum's incompetence directly shields Burns from accountability. The nuclear plant's violations, the environmental dumping, the contamination of Springfield's water supply. These are not subtle crimes. They are documented, visible, and in several cases literally glowing. Wiggum has been in Springfield for the duration of Burns's operations. He lives in the contamination zone. He presumably drinks the same water and breathes the same air as everyone else in town. And he has never, in 36 years, opened an investigation into Burns. Not once. The show has never depicted a scene in which Clancy Wiggum sits down, looks at the documented safety violations at the nuclear plant, looks at Blinky, the three-eyed fish, looks at the human skeletons in the plant's basement, and makes any connection between these facts and his professional responsibilities. The standard explanation is that he is too incompetent to see the connection. But here is the problem with that explanation. Wiggum is not consistently incompetent. He is selectively incompetent. There are episodes where he demonstrates actual investigative insight. There are moments where he reads a situation accurately, where he makes a connection that a genuinely obtuse person would not make, where he shows a flash of the competence that his position theoretically requires. The incompetence is not total. It is applied. It is directed. And it is almost exclusively directed at investigations that would threaten Springfield's most powerful interests. The theory that Wiggum is not simply bad at his job, but is actively corrupt, running a police department that is institutionally designed to protect certain people and to fail everyone else, is supported by evidence that accumulates across every season of the show. His relationship with Fat Tony alone is damning. Fat Tony D'Amico is Springfield's organized crime figure. He runs the local mob operation with a visibility that, in any functioning law enforcement environment, would make him a priority investigative target. He has lunch with prominent Springfield citizens. He attends civic events. He is not hiding. He is operating in the open because he has established relationships with the people who would otherwise investigate him that make investigation unnecessary. Chief Wiggum's interactions with Fat Tony are framed, when they appear, as either comedy or as evidence of Wiggum's corruption that the show presents without commentary. There are episodes where Wiggum is clearly receiving something from Fat Tony's organization, not always money, sometimes favors, sometimes simply the agreement that certain things will remain unexamined. The show depicts this as a given, as part of Springfield's normal operating environment, without ever pushing on what it means for the people who live there and depend on its police department to function with some degree of integrity. The people who suffer most from Wiggum's selective incompetence are, predictably, the people with the least power in Springfield. The working-class residents who bring legitimate complaints to the police and are told that nothing can be done. The residents of Springfield's less affluent areas who experience the full force of Wiggum's department's attention when the crimes involved are small, personal, and easily prosecuted, while watching the large-scale institutional crimes that structure their economic lives go permanently unaddressed. This is not a radical reading of the show. The show makes this explicit in multiple episodes. It is just that the show makes it explicit through comedy, through Wiggum's buffoonery, through the absurdist framing that characterizes everything about Springfield, and the comedy functions as a kind of social anesthetic. It makes the critique bearable by making it funny, but the critique is real. Wiggum Springfield is a town where a man who owns a nuclear plant with 342 safety violations never faces a criminal investigation, and a man who steals a car radio gets the full attention of whatever investigative resources the department can be bothered to deploy. Now, let's talk about Ralph. Ralph Wiggum is the chief's son, and he is one of the most complicated characters in the entire show. On the surface, he is the show's resident surrealist, the source of lines so perfectly strange that they have achieved independent cultural life. His observations do not seem to connect to the reality around him in any conventional sense. He describes experiences and perceptions that do not match what other characters are perceiving. He makes connections between concepts that a neurotypical 8-year-old would not make. He presents himself to the world with a serenity that is either the serenity of genuine happiness or the serenity of someone operating on a different frequency altogether. The surface reading of Ralph is that he has some kind of developmental difference that the show depicts through comedy rather than explanation. The show is not particularly careful about this, and the depiction is a product of its era in ways that a more contemporary approach might handle differently. But the deeper reading of Ralph, the one that fan communities have been circling for years, is that Ralph is not developmentally delayed in the way the show implies. He is perceiving something differently. He is operating on a mode of awareness that the other characters do not share. Consider the famous line, "My cat's breath smells like cat food." This is presented as an example of Ralph's disconnection from meaningful communication. But it is not wrong. It is a simple, factual observation, accurate and precise, about a sensory experience that a child would notice and that adults would not comment on because adults have learned to filter out the information that does not serve immediate social purposes. Ralph has not yet learned this filter, or he has learned it and declined to apply it. His observations are consistently either perfectly accurate in a way that the social conventions of adult communication would suppress, or they are completely disconnected from consensus reality in a way that suggests he is receiving information from somewhere else. There is rarely a middle ground with Ralph. He is either the only person in the room saying something true, or he is the only person in the room perceiving something that nobody else can detect. The radiation theory provides one framework for understanding Ralph. If Springfield's contaminated environment produces mutations that affect different residents in different ways, Ralph's perceptual differences could be the product of neurological alteration at a formative developmental stage. His brain processes information differently because something in Springfield's environment shaped it differently from the norm. The coma theory provides another framework. If everything in Springfield is Homer's dream, then Ralph represents the dream's symbolic acknowledgement of its own unreality. Ralph says things that make no sense because the dream knows it makes no sense, and Ralph is the mechanism through which the dream confesses its own nature. His surreal observations are not symptoms. They are commentary, the dream talking to itself. The most interesting theory, though, is the one that takes Ralph's observations at face value and asks, what if Ralph is the most perceptive person in Springfield? What if his father's profession has given him an upbringing that includes exposure to information that other Springfield children do not have? Chief Wiggum is a man who knows where Springfield's bodies are buried, figuratively and possibly literally. He has been at the center of Springfield's institutional corruption for 36 years. He goes home every night to a house where his son grows up listening, not intentionally, but because children listen to adults the way Springfield residents never quite listen to each other, with attention that the adults have stopped expecting. Ralph knows things. The show has demonstrated this repeatedly, usually by having Ralph say something that the adults in the room react to with discomfort before moving on. He has made references to events in Springfield's civic life that a child his age should not know about. He has said things about specific people that landed with a weight that the comedy framing could not quite absorb, and the adults around him have consistently responded by not responding, by redirecting, by treating what he says as the surreal output of a child they have categorized as too different to engage with directly. Ralph's perceptual peculiarity is the perfect cover for whatever he actually knows. Nobody asks Ralph to account for how he knows things because nobody expects him to know things in the first place. He is categorized. He is managed. He is, in the language of the Maggie theory, ignored. This means Ralph Wiggum may be carrying more of Springfield's actual history in his head than any other child in town, transmitted through an upbringing inside the house of the man who has been watching Springfield's institutional corruption operate from the inside for 3 decades. Chief Wiggum keeps his professional life separate from his home life. Presumably, most corrupt officials do. But total separation is impossible when you live with a child who notices cat food breath. The Springfield Police Department as an institution deserves its own examination, beyond its chief. The officers who populate Wiggum's department are, in most episodes, either absent or equally incompetent. Lou and Eddie, his 2 most visible subordinates, represent different failure modes. Lou is occasionally competent and consistently undermined by the environment he works in. Eddie is reliably useless in a way that suggests not individual failing but institutional culture. You do not get a whole department of ineffective officers by accident. You get one through deliberate selection, through a chief who, consciously or otherwise, hires and promotes people who will not destabilize the arrangements he has made. This is how institutional corruption sustains itself. Not through active conspiracy, usually, though sometimes that, but through the accumulation of hiring decisions and promotion decisions and assignment decisions that consistently move competent disruptors out of positions where they could ask uncomfortable questions and move compliant non-questioners into those positions instead. The department does not function because it is not supposed to function. It is supposed to manage the appearance of functioning while the actual power structures that run Springfield operate without interference. Wiggum is the mechanism of this management. He is the smiling, donut-eating, lovably incompetent face that Springfield's residents see when they interact with their police department. The face that makes it feel like things are being handled, like someone is in charge, like the institutions are working. They are working, just not for Springfield's residents. There is one episode that illuminates this entire dynamic more clearly than any other, and the show drops it so quickly that it barely registers. In an episode that deals with Springfield's organized crime connections, Wiggum is briefly placed in a position where he could genuinely act against Fat Tony's organization and genuinely disrupt the arrangement that has kept Springfield's criminal underworld running smoothly alongside its civic institutions. He has the evidence. He has the legal authority. He has, in that moment, a genuine choice. He does not make the choice. The episode moves on. The arrangement resumes. This is the essential Wiggum moment, not the incompetence, which is constant, but the moment when the incompetence is revealed to be adjacent to something more deliberate. He is not failing to act because he does not understand the situation. He is failing to act because acting would require him to be a different person than he is, a person who has chosen, whether consciously or through accumulated habit, to be part of a system that works against the people he is nominally serving. And he goes home to Ralph, who says things that suggest he knows more than he lets on, and who the adults around him have long since stopped listening to carefully. The whole structure is held together by inattention. The town does not look closely at Wiggum because Wiggum makes himself comfortable to look at, and Wiggum does not look closely at certain things because looking at them would require a reckoning he has arranged his entire life to avoid. Springfield's law enforcement is not broken. It is performing its actual function, which is to ensure that the people who need law enforcement most receive it least, and that the people who benefit most from law enforcement's absence remain undisturbed. Clancy Wiggum is the human face of that function, and behind him is Ralph, watching everything with those enormous eyes, cataloging whatever his father's life has exposed him to, waiting for the moment when someone asks the right question. Nobody has asked yet, but Ralph will have an answer when they do. There is a man who lives in a shack on the grounds of Springfield Elementary. He has lived there for as long as the school has existed in the show's continuity, which is to say for 36 years. He is not a janitor, exactly, though he does cleaning work. He is not a groundskeeper in the traditional sense, though grounds maintenance is technically his job description. He is something harder to categorize. A man who has made himself indispensable to an institution while being simultaneously excluded from every social benefit that institution might offer someone in his position. His name is Willie, just Willie. His last name has been given as McDougal in some episodes, and his family background has been depicted with varying degrees of consistency across the show's run. He is Scottish. He is enormously physically strong. He is frequently enraged, and the expression of that rage is one of the show's most reliable comedy mechanisms. And he lives in a shack. Not a small apartment near the school. A shack. On the school grounds. He sleeps there. He eats there. He performs his physical maintenance of Springfield Elementary from a structure that, by any reasonable standard, is inadequate housing for a human being in any climate, let alone the climate that Springfield experiences, which includes episodes of severe blizzard conditions and episodes of tropical heat, and apparently anything the writers need the weather to be. The show treats the shack as a visual gag. Willie emerges from it periodically to contribute to whatever scene is happening, delivers his lines, and retreats back inside when the scene no longer requires him. The shack is established. The shack is consistent. And nobody in 36 years, not Principal Skinner, not Superintendent Chalmers, not any Springfield civic authority with oversight of the school's facilities, has made any move to address the fact that an employee of the Springfield public school system is living in a structure that would not pass a basic habitation inspection. This is not an oversight. In a show this deliberate about its background details, this much consistency around a single detail is not an accident. Willie lives in the shack because he is not permitted to live anywhere else. Not legally, necessarily, but structurally. The situation exists and persists because it is being maintained by a system that benefits from having Willie available, functional, and dependent in exactly the way his housing situation makes him. Let's examine Willie's actual role at Springfield Elementary more carefully. He maintains the physical plant of a school that is, by the show's own repeated acknowledgement, deeply underfunded and operating with minimal resources. The school's budget is a constant source of comedy. There is no money for instruments, no money for extracurricular activities, no money for adequate textbooks. Springfield Elementary is running on the absolute minimum required to keep its doors open and its mandatory attendance metrics satisfied. And yet Willie is there every day. The grounds are maintained. The building, despite its issues, functions. Boilers run. Heating and cooling, when the episodes need them to exist, work. The physical infrastructure of the school, as decrepit as it is held together by one man working alone from a shack. Willie is providing labor-intensive maintenance work for a municipal institution at what is presumably minimum wage or below in exchange for housing that would be considered substandard in any functional regulatory environment. He has no union representation depicted in the show. He has no apparent legal recourse for his working conditions. He is, in the cleanest economic terms, exploited, and the exploitation is structured in a way that makes it self-perpetuating. He cannot afford alternative housing because his wages are insufficient. He cannot negotiate for better wages because his housing is part of his compensation. He cannot leave because leaving would mean being both unemployed and homeless simultaneously, a combination that the institutional systems of Springfield are perfectly designed to make catastrophic. The Springfield public school system is extracting maximum labor from a man in minimum conditions, and the mechanism that ensures this continues indefinitely is the same shack that the show has been using as a visual gag for 36 years. Now, let's examine where Willie came from, because the show has provided several conflicting and ultimately unresolved versions of his origin. In one episode, Willie's background is depicted as emerging from profound rural Scottish poverty. In another, he is shown as having had a significantly more comfortable background before some unspecified disaster brought him to his current circumstances. In at least one episode, his backstory involves a romantic tragedy. In another, it involves a professional failure. The show has never committed to a single coherent origin for Willie, and the inconsistency is not the result of carelessness. It is consistent with the way the show handles characters who exist primarily as service characters, whose backstory is whatever the episode currently needs it to be. But the emotional core of every Willie origin story, regardless of the specific details, is the same. He was somewhere else. He came to Springfield, something went wrong. He ended up in the shack, and the thing that went wrong, whatever it was, is never fully resolved. Willie is in Springfield because Springfield is where he ended up, not because it is where he belongs. This is a pattern in Springfield. The town accumulates people who ended up there. The sea captain, Apu, Willie, characters whose backstories, when the show bothers to provide them, involve some combination of aspiration and catastrophe that terminated in Springfield rather than wherever the original trajectory was pointing. Springfield is not a destination. It is a place where trajectories end. For Willie, the specific nature of his arrival matters less than what has happened since. He has been at the school for so long, and his role has become so structurally embedded that the distinction between him and the institution is genuinely unclear. He is not employed by Springfield Elementary in the way a person with options is employed somewhere. He is woven into it. The school depends on him in ways that have never been formally acknowledged, because acknowledging the dependence would mean acknowledging the conditions under which it operates. Willie's relationship with the children of Springfield Elementary is one of the show's more quietly complex recurring elements. He is gruff with them. He threatens them, verbally and occasionally with tools. He expresses approximately zero conventional warmth toward his charges. But he is also consistently present. He is the adult who is physically there on the school grounds, at the hours when children are most vulnerable, during recess, after school hours, during the periods between formal class time when adult supervision is at its thinnest. He is not a warm figure. He is not a mentor in any conventional sense, but he is there. And in a school that is otherwise populated by adults who are primarily concerned with managing their own professional survival and their own dysfunction, Willie's consistent physical presence is a form of care that the show acknowledges obliquely, but never directly. There is a scene in one of the Treehouse of Horror episodes where Willie is killed and then comes back and is killed again, across multiple horror parodies. The joke is that nobody in Springfield is more naturally resilient to catastrophic physical harm than groundskeeper Willie. He takes damage that would destroy a normal person and returns for more, a characteristic that the show uses for escalating comedy, but that, under the radiation theory, carries a different weight. Willie's physical resilience, his extraordinary strength, his tolerance for conditions that would disable other people, fits the same pattern as Homer's physical resilience. Springfield's contaminated environment does not affect everyone the same way. It appears to produce, in certain residents, an adaptation toward physical durability. Burns maintains his existence through medical technology. Homer absorbs catastrophic trauma and heals. Willie is simply built in a way that allows him to function under conditions that the show has established would destroy anyone less physically unusual. His extreme strength is something the show uses repeatedly. He rips doors off of cars. He lifts objects that the physics of a normal human body would not support. He endures cold and heat and physical injury with a cheerfulness that is, in the show's framing, cultural, a Scottish thing. But that is also, if you follow the radiation logic, biological. He is what happens when Springfield's environmental effects compound over years of exposure on a person whose baseline physical constitution already trended toward the exceptional. The episode where Willie is briefly identified as a potential match for Groundskeeper of the Year, competing against a counterpart from another school district, is interesting precisely because it shows Willie measured against a standard external to Springfield. The comparison reveals something that the Springfield context obscures. Within his own environment, Willie is normalized. He is the gruff, violent, shack-dwelling groundskeeper. That is just what Willie is. But measured against what a functioning school system provides its equivalent employee, what that employee's working conditions look like, what compensation and housing and professional respect looks like in a context that is not Springfield, Willie's situation is revealed as what it actually is. He is severely exploited by a civic institution that benefits from his labor while providing him with the absolute minimum necessary to keep him functional and on site. The show acknowledges this for the duration of the scene, and then the scene ends, and Willie goes back to his shack, and Springfield resets, and the acknowledgement dissolves. This is what Springfield does with its most damning evidence. It reveals it, briefly, in a frame that is easy to laugh at or past, and then it lets the next scene absorb it. Willie's anger, which is the most consistent feature of his characterization and the source of most of his comedy, reads differently when examined through the lens of his actual situation. He is angry in the way that a person is angry when they have been placed in a situation they did not choose, that they cannot easily escape, that extracts significant labor from them while providing minimum return, and that is surrounded by institutional structures designed to make the inequity appear natural and inevitable. He is not angry because he is Scottish, or because he is inherently volatile, or because the show needs a temperamental foil for the more composed characters around him. He is angry because he is living in a shack and maintaining a public school by himself for wages that apparently do not support alternative housing, and nobody in 36 years has done anything about it. That is a reasonable thing to be angry about. The comedy strips the reasonableness away, but it does not change the underlying structure. Willie's most poignant moments in the show are the ones where his relationship to Springfield Elementary is revealed to be genuinely emotional rather than merely functional. There are episodes where it becomes clear that the school is not just where he works and lives. It is the closest thing to home he has experienced in Springfield, which is also the closest thing to home he has experienced anywhere, given that his actual home, Scotland, is either inaccessible or a site of whatever loss the episode chooses to attribute to him that week. He is attached to a place that is exploiting him. He is loyal to an institution that has no loyalty to him. He is emotionally invested in the children of a school system that would, if the show ever depicted it doing so, replace him with someone cheaper without a second thought. This is the quietest tragedy in Springfield's background, not the dramatic tragedy of Mona Simpson's exile, or Ned Flanders' psychological programming, or Eleanor Abernathy's professional dissolution. The quiet, sustained, unremarked-upon tragedy of a man who has nowhere else to go and who has made something like a life in the space available to him, which is a shack on school grounds, in a town that does not fully see him, in a show that uses his anger for laughs while the structure that produces the anger operates unchanged. Willie is still there. He will be there next episode. He will emerge from the shack, fix something, threaten a child or a colleague or the sky itself, and return. And the shack will remain. And Springfield will not notice. And the school will continue to function, in its minimal way, because Willie is keeping it together from inside a structure that should not be considered adequate housing for any human being. Nobody has said thank you. The show never shows us a moment where anyone in Springfield's institutional hierarchy acknowledges what Willie is actually providing. They use him. They categorize him. They let him live in the shack. And he stays. Because this is Springfield. And in Springfield, you stay where you are. The system makes sure of it. There is a man who has been performing happiness for so long that the performance has become the person, or possibly replaced the person, in ways that neither he nor the audience is entirely sure about anymore. His name is Herschel Schmoikel Pinchas Yerucham Krustofsky. He is known to Springfield as Krusty the Clown. And he may be the most genuinely broken human being in a show that is full of broken human beings. The surface version of Krusty is a reliable comedy machine. He is a washed-up entertainer whose children's show should have been canceled decades ago, whose merchandise empire is built on products that actively harm the children who use them, whose personal life is a documented disaster of substance abuse, financial ruin, and relationships so chaotic that the show has never attempted to catalog them comprehensively. He is cynical about his work. He is indifferent to his audience. He is, by every professional metric the show provides, a bad children's entertainer who has persisted in the role because Springfield is not particularly demanding and because Krusty's own sense of self is so thoroughly attached to the Krusty persona that stopping would mean confronting what is left underneath. What is left underneath is the real mystery. And the show has provided more evidence about Herschel Krustofski, the man, than it has ever synthesized into a coherent picture, leaving the synthesis to the audience. Let's start with his father. Rabbi Hyman Krustofski is one of the most significant figures in the Simpsons supporting cast, and his role in Krusty's psychology is established across the episodes that deal with their estrangement. The rabbi was, by the show's account, a man of genuine religious conviction and community standing in Springfield's Jewish neighborhood. He had a position. He had dignity. He had a vision of what his son should become, and that vision was very specifically not a clown. The estrangement between father and son is rooted in a confrontation that the show depicts as the defining event of Krusty's adult life. He wanted to perform. His father wanted him to follow into religious life. Neither man was willing to accommodate the other's vision. And the rupture that followed produced two things: Krusty the Clown as a public persona, and Herschel Krustofski as a private wound that never healed. The episode where Bart and Lisa help reconcile Krusty with his father is one of the show's most emotionally effective, precisely because it takes the comedy premise, the silly clown with the disapproving rabbi father, and plays it completely straight. The estrangement between the Krustofskis is not treated as a joke. It is treated as what it is: two people who love each other who have spent decades being kept apart by a conflict that, from the outside, looks small, but that, from the inside, was everything. Rabbi Krustofski died in a later season. The show handled his death with appropriate weight, and the effect of his death on Krusty, which is to say on Herschel, is what opens up the deeper mystery. With his father gone, the external structure that gave Krusty's internal conflict its shape dissolved. The reconciliation had happened. The wound had been addressed, if not fully healed. And what remained for Krusty after that was a question the show has never quite answered. Who is Herschel Krustofski when the defining opposition of his life has been removed? The answer the show provides, such as it is that he is still Krusty the Clown. He still does the show. He still hawks merchandise. He still behaves in the self-destructive ways that have characterized him for 36 years. The external circumstances changed. The man did not. This is the first indication that the Krusty persona is not a professional role that Herschel is playing. It is the structure of his personality. The clown is not a mask over a man. The clown is what the man became, so thoroughly and so long ago that the man underneath is, if not gone, then inaccessible in ways that neither Herschel nor anyone around him fully understands. The show has depicted Krusty attempting to be something other than a clown. He has made moves toward more serious entertainment. He has tried to express aspects of his identity that the Krusty persona suppresses. He has, in certain episodes, dropped the performance and spoken with a directness and a weight that reveals a person of considerably more depth than the seltzer bottle comedy suggests. And every time he does this, something brings him back. Not external pressure exactly, not the network or the advertisers or the audience, though those forces are present. Something internal. Something that looks, from outside the character, like an inability to sustain a version of himself that does not have the grease paint and the wig and the 40 years of conditioned response as scaffolding. He is afraid to be Herschel. He has been afraid for so long that he may no longer remember precisely what Herschel is. Krusty's relationship with Bart is the show's other central data point in his psychological portrait. Bart worships Krusty the Clown. This is established in the very first season and sustained across the entire run of the show. Krusty is Bart's hero, his cultural touchstone, the figure who represents for him a kind of joyful, consequence-free transgression that Bart's own life reaches for but rarely achieves. Krusty says and does things on television that the authority structures in Bart's life actively prohibit. He is, for Bart, a living proof of concept that you can be yourself, fully and without apology, and people will love you for it. This is deeply ironic given what we know about Krusty, because the person Bart is worshipping as a symbol of authentic self-expression is a man who has not been his authentic self in decades, possibly ever, and whose professional persona is itself a performance layered over the original person so many times that the layers are now load-bearing. But the relationship between them goes further than fan worship. There are episodes where Krusty treats Bart with something that resembles genuine affection, or at least something closer to genuine affection than Krusty typically extends toward anyone. Bart has, on more than one occasion, done things for Krusty that required genuine effort and genuine risk. He cleared Krusty's name when Krusty was framed for armed robbery by Sideshow Bob. He has advocated for Krusty in professional and personal contexts. He has treated Krusty as someone worth caring about even when Krusty has given him no particular reason to. And Krusty, in those moments, responds with something that is almost vulnerability. He is not used to being cared for without an agenda. His professional relationships are transactional. His personal relationships are chaotic and brief. And a 10-year-old boy who simply believes in him, who wants nothing from him except the continued existence of the persona he has built, is something he does not have a template for. The Bart-Krusty dynamic is the show's most interesting accidental mentorship. Accidental because neither of them has chosen it in any formal sense. And interesting because the mentorship runs, in certain moments, in both directions. Bart teaches Krusty something about what it means to be looked up to, not for what you can provide, but for what you are. And Krusty teaches Bart, mostly by negative example, what the cost is of building your entire identity around a performance rather than a self. Krusty's addiction history is addressed across multiple episodes, and it is handled with varying degrees of gravity. He has been depicted as addicted to various substances. He has attended and left rehabilitation. He has made and broken promises about his behavior. The show uses his addiction primarily for comedy, but there are episodes where the comedy fails to fully cover the underlying truth, that Krusty is in chronic pain, that the pain predates the addiction, and that the addiction was the solution his nervous system found to a problem that his psychology had not been able to resolve. The problem, again, is his identity, not his professional identity, which is stable if joyless. His personal identity, which is the part of him that knows he is Herschel Krustofsky, that carries the weight of his father's expectations and the decades of estrangement, and the question that has never been answered about what a man who chose clowning over religion is supposed to be when the clowning is done. The substances don't answer the question. They quiet it long enough to get through the next performance. And then it comes back. And then he quiets it again. And the show presents this cycle with enough comedy to make it watchable and enough reality to make it uncomfortable. Krusty's financial situation is its own separate mystery and deserves examination. He is, on the surface, extraordinarily wealthy. His brand is everywhere. Krusty Burger, Krusty brand products, the show, the merchandise, the guest appearances, the endorsements. By any external measure, Krusty has been generating enormous revenue for decades. He is also, repeatedly, broke, or near broke, or in the kind of financial trouble that requires desperate measures to resolve. The show cycles him through wealth and financial crisis with a regularity that should, by any logic, be impossible. How does a man with Krusty's revenue streams keep finding himself in crisis? The gambling is part of it. The show establishes this clearly. Krusty is a compulsive gambler with losses that are commensurate with his income, meaning the money flows in and flows out through a habit that scales up with whatever is available to scale up with. There is no accumulation because the habit consumes whatever accumulates. But the gambling is itself a symptom rather than a root cause. Compulsive gambling at the level the show depicts for Krusty is not about money. It is about the same thing everything about Krusty is about: the performance. The stakes, the moment where everything is on the line and the outcome is uncertain, and you have to be fully present because the cost of not being present is catastrophic. Krusty gambles because it is the only context in his life, outside of live performance, where he feels fully alive, where the outcome matters in a way he can feel, where the stakes are real and external rather than internal and suppressed. He is chasing the thing that his professional life used to provide and now provides only in the attenuated, repetitive way that a performance done thousands of times over 30 years provides it. He is bored. Underneath the chaos and the addiction and the financial disaster and the failed relationships and the bad merchandise and the cynicism, Krusty the Clown is profoundly, existentially bored. He has been doing the same show, with minor variations, for 3 decades. He has been playing the same character, giving the same performances, saying the same things to the same audience of Springfield children, and the audience keeps laughing. But the laughter stopped landing for him a very long time ago. The show provides one episode that reveals this boredom explicitly. When Krusty is given the opportunity to do something genuinely different, to perform in a context that challenges him rather than simply requiring him to repeat what he has always done, he comes alive in a way that the show presents as surprising, but that, if you have been watching him closely, is simply the sight of a man doing the thing he was originally meant to do, before decades of self-preservation turned it into something else. He can still feel it, the thing that made him want to be a performer in the first place, the thing that drove the original wedge between him and his father. It is still there, inside the layers of performed Krusty, inside the gambling and the substances and the franchise operations and the decades of compromised creative decisions. It is just very rarely asked for. There is a theory that circulates in Simpsons fan communities about Krusty's real relationship with Bart, and it is not a widely discussed one, but it is among the more emotionally resonant when you sit with it. The theory is that Krusty knows on some level that he is the wrong version of himself to be the hero that Bart has made him. That the Krusty the Clown that Bart worships is a construction, and that somewhere inside the construction is the knowledge that the worship is misdirected. That Bart is loving a performance, not a person. That the person, if he could be reached, would be both more interesting and more difficult than the performance allows him to be. And Krusty's treatment of Bart, which is inconsistent but trending toward genuine care across the long arc of the show, reflects this knowledge. He is trying to be worthy of the worship, at least intermittently. He is trying to give Bart something real amid all the constructed Krusty performance. Not because he has a strategy for it, because the kid keeps showing up, and something in Herschel Krustofsky, buried under the clown, responds to that with something approaching honesty. Krusty will never fully escape the persona. The show knows this. Herschel knows this, though the show rarely depicts him in a state of self-awareness that would allow him to articulate it. The persona is the structure that keeps him functional, and removing it would require replacing it with something, and he does not know what that something would be. So he keeps performing, he keeps doing the show, he keeps selling the merchandise, he keeps making the compromises and losing the money and taking the substances and gambling the stakes and giving Bart Simpson something to believe in, even knowing that the something is partly fiction. That is what Krusty does. It is probably all he knows how to do. And whether you read that as tragedy or as a kind of stubborn, sideways integrity, a man committing fully to the only version of himself that has ever been asked for, depends on what mood you are in and how carefully you have been watching. The clown paint covers a lot, but it has never quite covered everything. And in the gaps, in the moments when the performance slips and Herschel shows through, you catch a glimpse of a person who might have been something else, who is still, in some inaccessible part of himself, trying to figure out what. That is the real mystery of Krusty the Clown. Not the fraudulent merchandise or the gambling debts or the failed relationships. The mystery is whether Herschel is still in there, and whether, if the performance ever stopped, he would know how to come out. The Quickie Mart is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It has been open continuously for 36 years. It does not close for holidays. It does not close for civic emergencies. It remained operational during Springfield's dome containment by the federal government. It was one of the first establishments to reopen after Springfield's recurring disasters, which is possibly because it never actually closed during them. The Quickie Mart is the most reliably available institution in Springfield, more reliable than the police department, more reliable than Springfield's various hospitals, more reliable than City Hall. If Springfield is a body, the Quickie Mart is the heartbeat, constant, automatic, and largely unremarked upon until you imagine what the town would be like without it. And for the entirety of this operation, it has been run by one man. Apu Nahasapima Petalan has been behind the counter of the Quickie Mart for 36 years. He knows every regular customer's name. He knows their purchasing habits. He knows, from 36 years of observing Springfield's population, make purchasing decisions under varying conditions of stress, comfort, crisis, and normalcy. more about the psychology and behavior of Springfield's residents than any single other person in town. He also has a PhD in computer science from Caltech. This is not a minor detail. The show establishes Apu's educational background in an episode that treats it as a comic revelation. The highly educated man working a convenience store, the gap between his credentials and his employment presented as the joke. But the joke has always obscured something that deserves actual attention. Apu did not fail to find work commensurate with his education. He chose this, or something chose it for him, which amounts to the same thing in terms of where he ended up. A man with a doctorate in computer science from one of the most prestigious technical universities in the United States is working a 24-hour convenience store in Springfield, and the show has never fully reckoned with why. The story the show provides goes like this. Apu came to the United States from India to pursue his education. He arrived, he studied, he completed his doctorate. He remained in the country after his visa was intended to expire. An undocumented immigrant living and working in Springfield. The quick E-Mart position, the story goes, was what he could get and keep without the documentation that would have allowed him to seek employment commensurate with his degree. This is a coherent and grimly realistic portrait of how immigration status constrains the professional options of people with exceptional credentials, and it is also the one time the show addresses Apu's situation directly before moving on to something easier. But the immigration angle is not the whole story, because Apu's immigration status is resolved in a later season. He becomes a citizen. Legally, the barrier that the show attributed to his convenience store employment is removed, and he keeps working at the Quick E-Mart. Why? The show provides some answers at various points. Ownership of the store, familiarity, family considerations. But none of these explanations fully accounts for the fact that a man with a doctorate in computer science, who came of professional age during the period in which computer science skills were among the most economically valuable in the world, continues to work a 24-hour convenience store in a small American city that has been classified by the federal government as an environmental hazard. One answer, following from the radiation theory, is that Apu has been in Springfield long enough to be affected by the same environmental factors that shape every other resident. His cognition, his decision-making, his ability to imagine alternatives to his current situation may have been gradually compromised in ways that are not dramatic enough to be visible from the outside, but that have progressively narrowed the range of options he can conceive of and act on. But this does not quite fit either, because Apu does not present as cognitively impaired. He is, in most episodes, the sharpest person in the room. He calculates, he anticipates, he manages complex social and financial situations with a dexterity that most Springfield residents cannot match. The more interesting answer is that the Quick E-Mart is not just a job for Apu, it is a position. A specific, singular, deeply advantageous position in Springfield's social ecology, and a man with a doctorate in computer science and 36 years of applied behavioral observation has understood this about it for a very long time. Consider what the Quick E-Mart provides its proprietor. It provides daily interaction with every segment of Springfield's population. The Quick E-Mart is not a specialty store. It does not attract a specific demographic. It attracts everyone, because everyone needs convenience store goods at some point in their daily life. Burns stops in on the way to the plant. Wiggum stops in during his shift. Every Springfield resident, at some point in the week, comes through Apu's store. This means Apu has been building something for 36 years that only a man in his position could build. A map of Springfield's behavioral patterns, purchasing habits, social relationships, and private struggles, assembled one transaction at a time, across 36 years of continuous operation. He knows who drinks. He knows who has changed their purchasing patterns in ways that suggest domestic or financial stress. He knows which Springfield residents are having affairs, because affairs produce specific and recognizable changes in purchasing behavior. He knows, from the pattern of what people buy and when they buy it, more about the internal lives of Springfield's residents than any other single observer. The Quick E-Mart is the town's confessional. People reveal themselves in small purchases in ways they would never reveal themselves in conversation. The combination of goods, the time of day, the cash versus credit, the items that are bought quickly versus the items that are deliberated over, all of it tells a story about the person doing the buying. And Apu has been reading those stories every day for 3 decades. What does he do with this information? The show never tells us directly, but it has shown us, in episodes that deal with Apu's character with more depth than usual, that he is not a passive observer. He is a man who thinks carefully and plans deliberately, and who, despite the apparent stasis of his position behind the counter, is continuously active in ways that the quick E-Mart framing conceals. His family is itself a mystery that the show has never fully resolved. He has 8 children, 8 as the result of a difficult multiple birth that the show treats with its characteristic combination of comedy and genuine emotional weight. 8 children, raised in or near a convenience store in a town with compromised environmental conditions, educated in Springfield's underfunded school system, growing up in the shadow of a father whose professional life is entirely consumed by a business that is always open. What happens to Apu's children? The show barely addresses this. They appear in certain episodes as a comic ensemble, a mass of identical-seeming small people who function as a single narrative unit rather than as 8 distinct characters with individual trajectories. And then the show moves on, and the children recede into the background of Apu's story, which is itself background in the broader narrative. But those children are growing up. Unlike Bart and Lisa and Maggie, who are frozen by the show's floating timeline, there is a logical implication of 8 children in a Springfield context that the show has chosen not to follow. 8 children, absorbing whatever Springfield absorbs. 8 futures, shaped by the town's environmental and institutional conditions. The show cannot follow them without following what follows from following them, which is a reckoning with what Springfield's conditions actually produce in children raised within them, and that reckoning would require an honesty that the comedy format makes difficult to sustain. So the children remain a plurality, a fact about Apu's life, a source of jokes about parenthood and exhaustion and the demands of a large family in a small space, rather than 8 individual people with their own engagement with the Springfield situation. Apu's wife, Manjula, is the show's most underexplored character who has the most reason to be explored. She came to Springfield for Apu. She married a man she understood to be in a temporary professional situation, based on the story Apu told her about his life and his plans. She became, upon arrival, the wife of a convenience store owner in a town that is structurally hostile to the kind of life they presumably planned together when they agreed to the marriage. The episode where their marriage is severely strained addresses some of this directly. The specific nature of the crisis in their relationship is depicted as rooted in Apu's infidelity, which the show handles as a plot-level event rather than as a full psychological portrait. But underneath the plot, the structural issue is visible. Manjula is in Springfield, bound to the quick E-Mart life by the web of commitments and circumstances that brought her there, with 8 children and a husband whose actual inner life she may understand less fully than she believed before she arrived. She is a woman with her own history, her own education, her own aspirations, who is now a supporting character in a story that centers on the convenience store her husband operates. The show acknowledges this occasionally, in moments where Manjula's perspective breaks through the narrative to make itself felt. But it does not sustain the acknowledgement. She recedes back into wife and mother status, and the Quick E-Mart resumes its 24-hour operation. The economics of the Quick E-Mart themselves are worth examining because they do not quite work. A single-location convenience store in a mid-sized American city, staffed primarily by its owner who works continuously, sells products with convenience store margins, in a town that does not appear to have enormous disposable income concentrated in its population. This business should generate enough to sustain a family and no more. The idea that it supports, even modestly, a family of 10 is already a stretch. But Apu has been there for 36 years. He has had the same cash register and the same shelving units, and the same neon signs in the window, and the same rotating hot dog machine that has been rotating the same hot dogs for so long that the hot dogs themselves have achieved a kind of tenure. The capital investment has been depreciated to nothing. There are no employees beyond occasional hired help. The overhead is minimal. He has also been selling products whose quality controls are, by any reasonable standard, non-existent. The Quick E-Mart's food items have been depicted as expired, contaminated, or otherwise compromised in ways that should produce the kind of legal and health code responses that would close any actual food service establishment. They never do. The products keep selling. Springfield's residents keep buying them. Either the town's regulatory apparatus, which is already demonstrated to be non-functional in every other context, is equally non-functional here, Or there is something about the Quickie Mart's relationship to Springfield's power structure that provides it with the same operational latitude that the nuclear plant enjoys. Burns's plant dumps radioactive waste in playgrounds and faces no closure. The Quickie Mart sells food that should not legally be on shelves and faces no closure. Both institutions are embedded in Springfield's civic structure in ways that make them effectively immune from the regulatory interventions that would, in any functional system, address what they are doing. The difference is that Burns's immunity is the product of money and political influence. The Quickie Mart's immunity, if that is what it is, would have to be the product of something else. Of the 36 years of information that Apu has accumulated about Springfield's residents, perhaps, of the relationships he has built with every person who has come through his door, including the people whose cooperation is necessary for regulatory non-intervention. You cannot investigate the Quickie Mart's food safety record without the investigator being someone who has been in Apu's store, who has a purchasing history there, who is as visible in Apu's behavioral record as every other Springfield resident. The Quickie Mart is, in this reading, not just a position of informational advantage. It is a position of mutual vulnerability, where Apu knows enough about enough people that investigating him creates risks for the investigators. Not through blackmail, necessarily. Through the simple reality that any investigative context would involve making explicit the informal and often embarrassing purchasing histories of the people doing the investigating. This is not a comfortable reading. It is also not, given what the show has established about how Springfield's institutions actually work, an implausible one. Apu is still behind the counter. He will be there when the next episode begins. He will know your name when you walk in. He will know what you usually buy. He will be pleasant and professional and slightly resigned and completely present, the way he has been for 36 years, in the most advantageously positioned observation post in all of Springfield. His doctorate in computer science sits somewhere in the back, behind the shelf of products with compromised expiration dates, and the Quickie Mart is always open, and Apu sees everything, and Springfield has no idea how much. There is a school that has been failing its students for 36 years, and the failure is so complete, so systematic, and so structurally embedded in the institution that it has ceased to register as failure. Springfield Elementary is not a school that is trying to educate children and struggling. It is a school that has been designed, whether intentionally or through the accumulated drift of neglect and misaligned incentives, to produce a specific outcome. And the outcome it produces is Springfield citizens, people who are just educated enough to be functional in their assigned roles and not quite educated enough to question what those roles are. This is not a gentle reading of the show's educational satire. The show itself provides the evidence for it, over and over, in episodes that the comedy framing makes easy to watch without fully registering what they are saying. Let's start with what we know about Springfield Elementary's academic performance. The school's students consistently perform at the bottom of every standardized metric the episodes reference. When the show introduces comparison points, other Springfield schools, national averages, specific test results, Springfield Elementary is always at the lowest end of whatever the measurement is. Bart has been on the verge of being held back repeatedly. The academic interventions depicted at the school rarely work and rarely seem designed to work. The curriculum, when the show depicts it, appears to be at minimum several years behind what you would expect from a functional public elementary school. The response to this from Springfield's educational administration, represented primarily by Principal Skinner and Superintendent Chalmers, is an elaborate performance of accountability that never actually produces accountability. Chalmers appears periodically to express outrage at the school's performance, to threaten Skinner with professional consequences, and then to leave without implementing anything. Skinner responds to Chalmers's visits with a parallel performance of responsiveness that immediately dissolves when Chalmers is gone. The students watch this dynamic play out across years and absorb its implicit lesson. Authority figures perform their roles. The performance is not connected to outcomes. What matters is surviving the visit, not addressing the problem. This is the curriculum's most effective lesson. It is not one that appears in any formal syllabus. Principal Skinner himself is one of the most complex figures in the show's educational landscape, and the question of whether his failures are the product of incompetence or something more deliberate is one that the show has never definitively resolved. The Armin Tamzarian reveal complicates every reading of Skinner's professional behavior because it establishes that his entire identity at Springfield Elementary is built on a fiction. He is not the Seymour Skinner whose military service record and educational credentials presumably got him the principal position. He is a man who assumed that identity and has been maintaining it through a combination of habit and the town's collective agreement not to examine it too closely. What does it mean for a school's principal to be an imposter? The practical implications are significant. His academic credentials may belong to someone else. His military service record, which in some depictions informs his administrative style, belongs to someone else. The entire professional biography that presumably supported his hiring is not his. He holds a position of authority over children's education on the basis of an identity that was not legitimately his to claim. And the school's performance reflects this. Not because Tamzarian is necessarily incompetent. The show establishes that he is capable of genuine educational commitment in certain circumstances. But because a man maintaining a false identity is also maintaining a constant low-level crisis management that consumes cognitive resources that should be directed toward the job. He cannot fully commit to addressing Springfield Elementary's problems because a part of his attention is always occupied by the management of the fiction he is living inside. The students of Springfield Elementary are receiving education from a man who cannot be fully present in the role he is playing because the role is not his. Mrs. Krabappel, who taught Bart's class for the majority of the show's run and whose death in the show was handled with genuine emotional weight following the death of her voice actress, is the show's most fully developed portrait of what the teaching profession does to people who enter it with genuine commitment. Edna Krabappel started, the show implies, as someone who genuinely cared about teaching. The cynicism that characterizes her in her familiar form is depicted as accumulated, not original. She was not always the teacher who grades papers with indifferent disgust or who responds to Bart's provocations with barely contained despair. She became that teacher through the specific experience of being Bart Simpson's teacher at Springfield Elementary for many years, in a school that provides inadequate support, under an administration that performs accountability without producing it, for students whose environmental circumstances make academic engagement genuinely difficult. She is what idealism produces when it encounters institutional intransigence long enough. She is a warning that the show delivers repeatedly without ever framing it as a warning, because the comedy of her cynicism is easier to receive than the message the cynicism carries. What message? That the people responsible for educating Springfield's children have been systematically failed by the same institutional structures that are failing the children. The teachers at Springfield Elementary are not bad at their jobs because they are bad people or bad professionals. They are depleted, they are under-resourced. They are operating in a system that offers them no genuine support and no genuine accountability mechanisms that might produce improvement. They are, in short, in the same position as their students, placed in an institution that is ostensibly designed to serve them and that is actually designed to extract their compliance while providing minimum return. Lisa Simpson is the character through whom the show makes this critique most explicitly, and also the character whose experience of Springfield Elementary contains the show's deepest mystery about the school's actual function. Lisa is, by any measure, the most academically capable student Springfield Elementary has ever had. Her intelligence is documented, tested, referenced, and consistently demonstrated. She is operating at a level that the school cannot accommodate, cannot challenge, and cannot adequately assess. She is, by the show's own internal logic, too good for Springfield Elementary in a way that should trigger some institutional response. Advanced placement, supplemental programming, referral to more appropriate educational settings. Nothing of the kind ever happens. Lisa stays in the same grade, in the same classroom, studying the same curriculum that does not challenge her, year after year after year. The school knows she is exceptional. It has tested her, it has measured her, and it has done nothing to provide her with an education that matches her abilities. Why? The school does not have the resources for specialized programming. This is probably true given the depiction of its budget, but it is also true that Lisa could be identified as a candidate for programs that exist outside Springfield Elementary's direct provision. Other schools, state programs, accelerated options. The institutional apparatus of American public education, as dysfunctional as it often is, contains mechanisms for addressing the needs of students who fall outside the normal distribution. These mechanisms are rarely applied to Lisa. The theory that the show supports, without ever stating it directly, is that Lisa's exceptional intelligence is not a problem to be solved by Springfield Elementary. It is a problem to be managed. The goal is not to maximize Lisa's development. It is to keep her within the system, where her intelligence can be observed, her outputs can be monitored, and her tendency toward critical examination of Springfield structures can be channeled into forms that the system can absorb without being threatened by them. Lisa's intelligence, directed outward and provided with genuine resources and genuine challenges, would be dangerous to the institutional status quo. Lisa's intelligence, contained within Springfield Elementary, is just a feature of one unusually bright student who produces excellent work on inadequate assignments and is rewarded with gold stars and the occasional recognition that does not translate into any actual change in her circumstances. She is, in the most clinical sense, managed, not educated, managed. The show's most explicit engagement with this dynamic comes in the episodes where Lisa's access to external opportunities, gifted programs, special classes, encounters with educators from outside Springfield who recognize her abilities and want to provide real support is interrupted by the same structural forces that interrupt everything good in Springfield. The episodes almost always end with Lisa returning to her regular classroom, having briefly touched something that represented genuine opportunity, but unable to sustain it because Springfield is not a place that allows escape from its structures, even for its most exceptional residents. This is the educational version of the broader Springfield dynamic. The system produces people who fit the system and quietly neutralizes the people who might not. Not through active conspiracy necessarily, though the cases like Mona Simpson's exile suggest that active conspiracy is not beyond Springfield's institutional capacity. Mostly through the accumulated weight of underfunding, bureaucratic inertia, and the social pressures that push deviation back toward the norm. Bart's relationship with Springfield Elementary is the inverse of Lisa's, and it illuminates a different dimension of the school's actual function. Bart is not failing academically because he lacks intelligence. The show establishes this repeatedly. He has demonstrated, in contexts that engage him, a genuine capacity for learning and for creative problem-solving that the school's conventional curriculum cannot access. He is not a bad student. He is a student whose intelligence is not compatible with the modality of education Springfield Elementary provides. The school responds to this incompatibility by treating it as a behavioral problem. Bart is disruptive. Bart is a troublemaker. Bart is the kind of student who, in the institutional language the show deploys, is at risk. The at-risk framing shifts the problem from the institution to the individual. It is not that the school's curriculum cannot reach Bart, it is that Bart cannot reach the curriculum. The responsibility is his, not the school's. This is a fundamental sleight of hand that the show depicts with accuracy. Springfield Elementary cannot change the curriculum, cannot find new approaches to engagement, cannot adequately resource teachers who might work with students like Bart, because the school has no capacity for that kind of institutional flexibility. So it does what institutions without that capacity always do. It places the responsibility for the outcome on the person whose needs it cannot meet. Bart absorbs this characterization. He becomes what the school tells him he is. Not entirely, not without resistance, but enough that his self-concept is shaped by the institution's failure to find a way to reach him. He is the troublemaker. He accepts this, because the alternative is accepting that an institution with authority over him is wrong about him, and that is a kind of understanding that a 10-year-old boy does not necessarily have the resources to arrive at alone. The school produces a Bart who knows he is smart but who cannot see himself in academic terms, because academic terms have been consistently used to describe his failures rather than his capacities. This is not accidental. A Bart who understood himself as genuinely intelligent would be a Bart who might examine the structures around him with the same creativity and persistence he brings to his pranks. Springfield Elementary has produced, instead, a Bart who directs that intelligence laterally, into forms that are entertaining and sometimes heroic, but that do not challenge the fundamental arrangements of power that shape his life. He outsmarts Sideshow Bob. He does not outsmarts Burns. The distinction is significant. The school's physical plant, which Willie maintains from his shack, is itself a testament to the institutional priority structure. The building is perpetually on the edge of disrepair. There are water damage issues, heating system failures, structural problems that appear and then disappear between episodes in the same way that Springfield's disasters generally appear and disappear. The building is maintained at minimum operational standards, the minimum required to keep it technically functioning as a school, and not $1 more. This minimum maintenance is itself a policy decision. Decisions about what minimum to maintain are made by people who allocate resources. Resources are allocated based on priorities, and the priority that Springfield Elementary occupies in the town's institutional hierarchy is clearly not high. It is the minimum required to maintain the appearance of civic functionality in the area of public education. The appearance is the point. Springfield Elementary does not exist to educate Springfield's children. It exists to absorb Springfield's children, for the years required by law, to provide a structure that looks like education from the outside, and to produce graduates who are functional in the limited ways that Springfield's economic structure requires them to be functional. This is a harsh reading. It is also the reading that the show's evidence most consistently supports when you step back from the comedy framing and look at what Springfield Elementary has actually produced over 36 years of depicted operation. It has produced Springfield's population. It has produced the adults who work at the nuclear plant and shop at the Quick E-Mart and watch Krusty's show and vote in Springfield's rigged elections and drink the contaminated water without connecting the fish to the reactor. It has done its job, which was never to educate them in the liberating sense. It was to prepare them for the specific kind of life that Springfield offers. And Lisa is still in the 2nd grade, and Bart is still in the 4th, and the school is still open every weekday, producing the same outcomes, teaching the same lessons, managing the same exceptional students back into the average, and preparing the same compliant, limited citizens for the same system that produced them. Springfield Elementary is not failing. It is succeeding. The question is only what it was designed to succeed at. There is a character at the center of The Simpsons who has been hiding in plain sight since the first episode, not hiding behind a false identity the way Skinner is hiding. Not hiding behind a professional persona, the way Krusty is hiding. Hiding behind the appearance of perfect, uncomplicated domesticity. Behind the role of wife and mother that the show has used to define her so thoroughly that the person inside the role has become almost invisible. Marge Simpson is the most mysterious character in The Simpsons, and the mystery is not one that the show has ever fully addressed. Despite 36 seasons of material that should have opened it up, the surface version of Marge is the show's emotional anchor. She is the stable center around which the chaos of the Simpson family orbits. She worries, she nurtures, she maintains. She occasionally expresses frustration with Homer and then forgives him, because the show requires her to forgive him, and because she has been established as a person whose fundamental commitment to her family is stronger than any of Homer's recurring failures. She is, in the show's internal logic, the reason the Simpson family survives. This is all true as far as it goes. But what is also true, accumulated across 36 years of episodes that the show deploys and then walks back and then deploys again in a different form, is a portrait of a woman with depths that her assigned role consistently suppresses. Let's start with the blue hair. Marge's distinctive hairstyle, the improbable tower of blue, is one of the most recognizable visual signatures in television history. It is so associated with her character that it functions as shorthand for Marge herself. You can identify her in silhouette. You can identify her from a single strand of that specific blue amid a crowd of yellow Springfield residents. The show has addressed the hair's implausibility within its own universe. Characters have commented on it. Episodes have depicted the maintenance required to sustain it. It is not treated as background visual shorthand the way most animated character designs are treated. The show is aware that Marge's hair is unusual, and it has never fully explained it. The radiation theory, which explains so much about Springfield's visual aesthetic, offers one reading. The hair's color and structure are the products of the same environmental forces that have made every Springfield resident visually distinctive. Marge's mutation just manifested in her hair, the way Lisa's manifested in her musical ability, and Homer's manifested in his physical resilience and cognitive vulnerability. But there is another reading, one that the show hints at without committing to. The hair is who Marge was before she became what the show most frequently depicts her as being. It is a remnant of an earlier self, a self that was more visible, more assertive, more present in her own life, rather than in the background of other people's stories. The hair is the one piece of the original Marge that survived the transition into domesticity unchanged. Everything else adjusted, accommodated, receded, the hair stayed, and the hair being blue specifically is worth noting. Blue, in the cultural vocabulary of Springfield and in most Western visual codes, is not the color of warmth or nurturing or domestic comfort. It is the color of depth, of melancholy, of things that go further down than you can see. Marge wears it on her head, always, even when everything else about her presentation is oriented toward the conventional and the comfortable. The show has depicted multiple episodes in which Marge's pre-Homer life is partially revealed, and in each of them the revelation is consistent with a reading of her as someone who was more fully herself before the architecture of her marriage and motherhood was constructed around her. The most significant of these episodes involves Marge's pre-Homer romantic life, her dreams of being an artist, her political engagement as a young woman, her intellectual curiosity before the specific demands of the Simpson household became the primary consumer of her attention. She is a gifted visual artist. The show establishes this across multiple episodes. Her paintings have been shown to be technically accomplished and emotionally sophisticated, not in the way of a hobbyist who has developed a skill, but in the way of someone with genuine native visual intelligence. When she paints, she produces work that reflects a depth of perception that her daily domestic life does not call upon. The painting episodes are consistently among the show's most interesting Marge-centered stories, because they are the episodes where the character who is hidden inside the role is allowed to partially surface. And then the episode ends and she returns to the kitchen, and the worry and the support of Homer's latest disaster, and the painting is forgotten or referenced only obliquely in later episodes. The show does this repeatedly. It gives Marge something that is genuinely hers, something that reflects her own capacities and desires rather than her role in the Simpson family economy, and then it takes it away. Not violently, not through some dramatic act of suppression, through the accumulation of ordinary demands that crowd out the exceptional and replace it with the necessary. This is the most realistic thing The Simpsons has ever depicted. Not the nuclear plant or the rakes or the celebrity guest appearances. The way that the ordinary demands of a life can crowd out the exceptional things in it so gradually and so thoroughly that the crowding out eventually stops feeling like loss and begins to feel like what life is. Marge's pre-Homer relationships are addressed in several flashback episodes with varying degrees of specificity. The recurring character of Artie Ziff is the show's most developed portrait of what Marge's romantic life might have looked like if Homer had not been the one who showed up when he did. Artie Ziff is, in the show's depiction, someone who appreciated Marge's intelligence and her particular kind of grace in ways that Homer, with his cognitive limitations and his self-absorption, has never quite managed to approximate. He is also, the show is careful to establish, a deeply flawed person in ways that make the Artie counterfactual less appealing than the surface comparison suggests. He is controlling. He is status-obsessed. He is, for all his surface sophistication, someone who treats Marge as an object of acquisition rather than as a person with her own trajectory. But the fact that the show introduces Artie Ziff at all and returns to him multiple times suggests that it is doing something more than providing a comic foil for Homer. It is acknowledging that Marge's life had branches, that the person she is now is not the only version of her that could have developed from the person she was, that her choice of Homer, or Homer's choice of her, or the specific circumstances that brought them together was contingent rather than inevitable. The contingency of Marge's life choices is the show's most radical element, and the one it is most reluctant to pursue, because pursuing it would mean taking seriously the question of whether Marge's life, as it has developed, is actually what she wanted. And the show has too much invested in the Simpson family as a unit to be comfortable with that question. But the evidence the show provides across 36 seasons does not let the question rest entirely. Marge has expressed, in various episodes and in various ways, dissatisfaction with aspects of her life that goes beyond the comic complaints about Homer. She has experienced depression that the show has depicted at its most honest as a real clinical condition and not simply a comedic extension of her worry. She has had moments of genuine longing for lives she did not pursue. She has encountered versions of herself in other women's lives and responded to them with a kind of recognition that is both warm and painful. The Marge who went to the police academy and discovered genuine aptitude for the work. The Marge who opened a pretzel business and found that she had real commercial instincts. The Marge who engaged with Springfield's civic politics and demonstrated both the intelligence and the moral clarity to be genuinely effective. These Marges keep appearing and keep receding because the show does not have a structure that allows them to develop into something permanent. The domestic frame always reasserts itself. The deeper mystery about Marge is not about what she gave up. It is about what she knows. Marge is the character who has the most direct, the the most sustained, and the most intimate access to the operations of the Simpson household, which means she has the most direct access to the operations of Springfield's economy because Homer's position at the nuclear plant places the household in the center of the town's primary economic and environmental power structure. She knows about the plant. She has been in the plant. She has experienced, through Homer, the daily reality of working inside one of the most dangerous industrial facilities in the show's universe. She has seen the safety violations, or at least heard about them, over 36 years of dinnertime conversations that the show occasionally depicts. She knows about Burns, about Homer's relationship with Burns, about the specific ways that relationship shapes their family's economic security and emotional stability. She knows about the Mona situation. She knows that Homer's mother was driven from Springfield by Burns's actions. She knows that the man who employs her husband is the man who destroyed her husband's family. And she has watched Homer fail, consistently, to connect these facts in any way that produces action. This is where the theory about Marge becomes both most interesting and most difficult to sit with. Marge knows more than she says. She has always known more than she says. Her role in the family requires her to manage the emotional atmosphere of the household, which means managing information about that atmosphere. She decides what to address directly and what to manage quietly. She decides what Homer needs to know and what he needs to be protected from knowing. She is, functionally, the information manager of the Simpson family in ways that go far beyond conventional wifely discretion. And the question that follows from this is whether her management of information is entirely protective and entirely domestic, or whether it has, over 3 decades, developed into something with a larger scope. The show has depicted Marge, on multiple occasions, as the person who holds the Simpson family together through the sheer force of her understanding of how each member of her family works. She knows Homer's vulnerabilities and his capacities. She knows Bart's actual intelligence beneath his performed difficulty. She knows Lisa's loneliness inside her brilliance. She knows Maggie's extraordinary nature in ways that the show only occasionally allows her to articulate. She has been watching her family, with the same careful attention that Apu brings to his customers and that Patty and Selma bring to their DMV clients, for 36 years. And a person who watches that carefully accumulates something, a model of how things work, a sense of what the pressure points are and what the fault lines are, and where the system is most vulnerable to change. Marge has never used this knowledge. That is the answer the show provides. She watches, she understands, she manages, and she returns to the kitchen and the worry resumes and Homer falls down again somewhere, and the episode ends with the family intact. But there is a reading of Marge's consistent non-action that is not passivity, it is patience. A patience so long sustained that it has become indistinguishable from patience in the casual viewer's register, but that has a different character when you look at it across the full span of the show's run. She is waiting for something. The show will never tell us what. But 36 years of watching Marge manage an impossible situation with extraordinary care and extraordinary restraint suggests a woman who is not simply enduring, she is preparing. For what and when and how, the show has never quite said. The blue hair stays up, the kitchen light is on, and Marge Simpson is paying attention to everything in the way that only someone who has been underestimated for 36 years can afford to pay attention. She is the most dangerous person in the Simpson family. The show has been telling us this, quietly, for decades. Nobody in Springfield has noticed yet. Every October, The Simpsons does something strange. It steps outside its own rules. The Treehouse of Horror episodes are presented as non-canonical, as stories that exist outside the normal continuity of the show, free from consequences, free from the constraints of Springfield's internal logic, free to kill characters and resurrect them, and explore scenarios that the regular format cannot accommodate. This is the official position. The Treehouse episodes are horror anthology specials. They are not real. They do not count. But here is the thing that has been quietly accumulating evidence across 34 Treehouse of Horror episodes. The line between what counts and what does not count in The Simpsons is not as clear as the official position suggests. And the Treehouse episodes, examined carefully, reveal things about Springfield and its characters that the regular episodes cannot or will not say directly. They are not outside the show's mythology. They are the show's mythology with the protective comedy framing removed. Let's start with what the Treehouse episodes actually are, structurally. Each special contains 3 stories, or sometimes 2 longer ones, that are presented as horror parodies. parodies of movies, of literary works, of cultural horror traditions. The Simpson characters are placed into these horror frameworks, and the comedy comes from the incongruity, from Homer as a monster, from Bart in a Twilight Zone scenario, from Lisa confronting something supernatural in a story that mirrors a specific horror property the audience recognizes. This is the surface structure, but the horror content itself, underneath the parody framework, is usually doing something specific. It is examining the thing that the regular episode cannot examine, the fear that the normal narrative structure contains but cannot directly address. Homer killing his family in the parody of The Shining is not just a horror comedy, it is a treehouse of horror acknowledgement that the regular show's portrayal of Homer's violence toward Bart, played for comedy in the regular format, has a register that the comedy framing requires not to be taken seriously, but that the horror format can briefly acknowledge as serious. Homer as horror monster is Homer as what Homer actually is to the people who love him, occasionally frightening, occasionally capable of genuine harm, in ways that the domestic comedy cannot afford to admit. The episode structure in Treehouse specials also does something interesting with death. Characters die, frequently and grotesquely. They come back. The deaths do not count because nothing in the Treehouse episodes counts. But the show's relationship to death in its non-canonical format reveals something about its relationship to death in its canonical format. Springfield's characters do not die in regular episodes, with rare and significant exceptions. They are functionally immortal in the same way the show's floating timeline makes them functionally ageless. Death happens to guest characters, to historical figures, to characters at the periphery of the show's focus. The core cast endures. The Treehouse episodes are where the show processes the death it cannot acknowledge in its regular format. They are where the characters can die, and the audience can experience the emotional register of that death without the show having to sustain the consequences. The grief is real, in the moment, even knowing it will be reset by the next segment. And the reset is part of the point. The Treehouse episodes are Springfield's relationship to death in its most honest form. The characters die and come back, the way they always do, the way they always will, because the show cannot allow them to stay dead any more than Springfield's normal operation can allow its residents to fully die. Hans Mollemann dies in Treehouse episodes. He also dies in regular episodes. The difference is taxonomic, not experiential. He is equally dead in both contexts and equally alive in the next scene in both contexts. The Treehouse label does not change the phenomenon. It just provides a frame that makes the phenomenon legible as intentional, rather than as a continuity error. The most interesting Treehouse episodes are the ones where the horror scenario is not clearly a parody of an external property, but is instead an original scenario that uses the horror format to explore something about Springfield. Directly. The episode where Springfield's residents discover that their town is controlled by giant aliens who have been keeping them as pets is, on the surface, a science fiction comedy. But the scenario it depicts, a population living in a controlled environment, their behavior managed by entities with resources and intelligence far superior to their own, who have shaped the town's conditions for their own purposes, is functionally a description of Springfield's actual situation, with Burns removed and replaced by something more obviously alien. The horror scenario and the actual Springfield situation rhyme so closely that the comedy almost collapses under the weight of the correspondence. The aliens are Burns. The dome is the nuclear plant. The managed pet population is Springfield's residents. The Treehouse frame makes this visible, without the regular show's need to immediately redirect toward a punchline. The Treehouse episodes involving time travel are another category worth examining. The show has returned to time travel scenarios multiple times, and the scenarios share a consistent anxiety. The past is fragile, decisions have consequences, and changing any element of history produces results that are unpredictable and cannot be easily undone. Homer's various trips into the past, in the Treehouse format, consistently produce alternate Springfields that are worse than the original, or different in ways that are either horrifying or unsatisfyingly similar, depending on the episode. The show's conclusion, across these episodes, is that Springfield is what it is because of specific historical decisions, and that changing those decisions would produce something, but not necessarily something better. This is the Treehouse format's most explicit engagement with the regular show's mythology. The time travel episodes acknowledge that Springfield's current state is contingent, that it did not have to be this way, that specific choices and specific events produced the specific town that exists now. And then they establish that undoing those choices produces chaos or produces versions of Springfield that are differently broken rather than functionally improved. The implicit argument is that Springfield is trapped in its current form not by fate, but by the impossibility of changing things without making them worse in different ways. This is the show's most sophisticated defense of its own status quo. Not that the status quo is good, that it is, for reasons embedded in Springfield's history, what you are left with after every alternative has been tried and found equally unsatisfying. Now let's examine the specific horror scenarios that the show has returned to most frequently, because the returns are significant. The Treehouse episodes are not random anthology horror. They have patterns. They return to certain anxieties with a consistency that suggests these anxieties are not incidental to the show but central to it. The most recurrent Treehouse anxiety is the loss of individual identity or autonomy within a collective. Homer is controlled, assimilated, replaced, duplicated, or otherwise subsumed into something that removes his individual agency across many different Treehouse scenarios. Bart is controlled or replaced or overridden. The family is absorbed into a unit that negates their individual identities. This anxiety is not arbitrary. It is the show's most honest expression of what the regular episodes only approach obliquely. Springfield's residents are not autonomous agents who have freely chosen their circumstances. They are people whose circumstances have been shaped by institutional forces that have constrained their choices in ways they cannot fully see. The Treehouse horror scenarios make explicit what the regular episodes make comfortable, that the residents of Springfield are, in significant ways, not in control of their own lives. The comedy format makes this livable, the horror format makes it visible, and the show returns to it, across 34 years of Treehouse specials, because it has not resolved it, because it cannot resolve it within the regular format, and because the horror frame is the only space where the anxiety can be acknowledged directly rather than deflected into comedy. The supernatural elements of the Treehouse episodes raise a question that the show has never quite resolved. What is the ontological status of Springfield's supernatural elements within the regular canon? The regular show has God appearing, it has angels, it has the devil, it has ghosts in certain episodes, it has events that have no natural explanation. The supernatural is not confined to the Treehouse format. It appears in episodes that are presented as canonical, as part of Springfield's actual reality, rather than as horror anthology material. This blurs the line that the show claims to maintain between what counts and what does not. If God appears in a regular episode and speaks to Homer, and if that appearance is canonical, then what is the ontological difference between that appearance and a supernatural appearance in a Treehouse episode? The show never answers this because answering it would require committing to a position about what kind of universe Springfield exists in. Is it a universe with genuine supernatural elements, where God's conversation with Homer was a real theological event? Or is it a universe where the supernatural appearances are manifestations of something else, of the coma dream, of the radiation's effects on cognition, of Springfield's collective hallucination of a reality that is more interesting than its actual conditions? The Treehouse episodes sit at the heart of this question because they are the format where the supernatural is most concentrated and most explicit. They are also the format where the show is most honest that the things happening might not be real, which paradoxically makes them the format where what the show is actually doing is most visible. The horror anthology format gives the show permission to say things it otherwise cannot say. The non-canonical label is not a limitation, it is a license. The Treehouse episodes are where the show processes its actual anxieties, examines its own mythology from outside the protective frame of the comedy, and acknowledges, through the horror genre's conventions, the darker registers of what it has been depicting in the regular episodes all along. Every Treehouse episode is, in some sense, what would happen if Springfield's residents were briefly allowed to see their situation clearly. The horror is not external, it is internal. It is the horror of Springfield's actual situation, stripped of the comedy that makes it manageable, presented in a format that can sustain the emotional register of what Springfield is actually like without the audience or the characters having to bear that weight into the next week's episode. Because when the special ends, the reset comes. The dead come back. The horror dissolves. Springfield returns to its comfortable, self-deceiving normal. And the characters who briefly experienced clarity return to the managed ignorance that allows them to function. The Treehouse episodes are the most important episodes of The Simpsons that nobody is supposed to take seriously. They are the show's confession. They are the moments when Springfield looks in the mirror and sees something other than the reflection it has agreed to maintain. And then the next Sunday arrives, and the couch gag plays, and everyone sits down, and the mirror goes back on the wall, and Springfield looks like itself again. Until next October. Springfield has a mafia. This is not a secret. The show has never treated it as a secret. Fat Tony D'Amico operates his criminal enterprise with a visibility that functions as either extraordinary confidence or extraordinary institutional protection, possibly both. He has lunch at Olive Garden. He attends town meetings. He is present at civic events with the ease of a man who has no concern whatsoever about being seen in public. And nobody arrests him. Nobody investigates him. Nobody in Springfield's institutional architecture, which we have established is run by a corrupt police chief in service of the town's most powerful economic interest, treats Fat Tony's obvious criminal operation as a problem requiring resolution. This is the baseline mystery of Fat Tony and Springfield's criminal underworld. But it is not the most interesting one. The most interesting mystery is what the Springfield criminal underworld actually controls, and how that control operates alongside the overt power structure that Burns represents. Because Springfield appears, in the show's depiction, to have two separate power structures operating simultaneously, Burns's overt institutional dominance and the mob's shadow economy, and the relationship between these two structures is one the show depicts without ever fully explaining. Fat Tony is not Burns's subordinate. The show makes this clear in episodes where the two power structures come into contact. Fat Tony operates independently. He has his own economic interests, his own organizational infrastructure, his own relationships with Springfield's institutions that are separate from Burns's network. He is not an extension of Burns's empire. He is a parallel empire. This raises the question of why Burns has tolerated the mob's presence in Springfield. A man of Burns's resources and institutional reach, who has systematically bent Springfield's civic infrastructure to his purposes, who has the police department and the political class in arrangements that serve his interests? Why has he not moved against Fat Tony? The most plausible answer, and the one the show edges toward without committing to directly, is that Burns and Fat Tony have an arrangement, not a formal alliance. Not a structured relationship that either party would acknowledge, but a functional understanding that defines spheres of operation and mutual non-interference. Burns controls the legitimate economy, the power plant, the employment, the political class through campaign financing, and the implicit threat of economic retaliation. He controls the things that move through official channels. Fat Tony controls what moves through unofficial ones. The shadow economy, the services that Springfield's residents need but that cannot be obtained through legitimate means, or that can be obtained more cheaply and more quickly through criminal channels. He controls the informal credit market that functions when the official banks are inaccessible. He controls the supply chains that do not require documentation. He controls the relationships and the mechanisms that make certain things possible in Springfield that official channels cannot provide. Neither power structure is complete without the other. Burns's Springfield needs the mob's Springfield to absorb the economic frustrations and the social needs that Burns's system produces, but cannot serve. The mob's Springfield needs Burns's Springfield to provide the stable economic environment in which a criminal organization can operate without the kind of social chaos that makes criminal enterprise impossible. They are, whether they have acknowledged it to each other or not, symbiotic. Springfield's power structure is not a single hierarchy. It is a dual system, and the stability of that system depends on both halves operating within their respective domains without attempting to absorb the other. Fat Tony's personal character is itself one of the show's more interesting portraits. He is a man who has fully committed to the archetype of the mob boss in a way that goes beyond professional identity into something almost aesthetic. He speaks in the measured, deliberate cadences of a man who has decided that the mob boss character requires a specific vocal register and who has practiced that register until it became second nature. He dresses the part. He manages his environment with the careful attention of someone who has constructed a persona and who maintains it the way Krusty maintains his clown persona, with a constancy that suggests the persona is doing work that goes beyond mere professional presentation. But unlike Krusty, Fat Tony appears to be genuinely comfortable inside his persona. There is not the palpable sense of suppressed self that characterizes Krusty's performance. Fat Tony seems to be, if not exactly who he presents himself as, then at least someone who is at peace with the gap between his presentation and whatever is underneath it. He is not a conflicted criminal. He is not a man tormented by his choices. He is someone who made choices, made them deliberately, and has organized his life and his psychology around those choices in a way that produces something close to equanimity. This is unsettling in a way that the show's comedy framing almost completely obscures. A man who commits crimes with the calm contentment of someone doing meaningful work is more disturbing than a man racked by guilt. The guilt suggests a moral interior that is still functioning, still capable of recognizing the gap between behavior and ethics. The equanimity suggests something else. A person who has resolved the gap by deciding that the ethical framework that would produce guilt does not apply to him. Fat Tony has not rationalized his behavior. He has simply decided that rationalization is not necessary, because he does not accept the framework within which his behavior would require rationalization. His relationship with his associates, the men who form his immediate organizational circle, is depicted with enough detail across the episodes to suggest something like a genuine community. These are not interchangeable goons. They have personalities, quirks, relationships with each other that the show has occasionally explored. They eat together, they complain together, they manage their organizational anxieties together. The mob in Springfield is, in the show's depiction, more of a community than most of Springfield's official civic institutions. It provides its members with a genuine sense of belonging, genuine economic security within its sphere, and genuine social identity in a town where all three of these things are otherwise extremely difficult to sustain. This is what it offers Homer when Homer becomes temporarily involved with the mob in the episode where he becomes a member. Not just money, not just protection. The experience of being part of something that has a coherent social structure, that values its members, that provides clear expectations and clear rewards. Homer's temporary mob membership is one of the show's most revealing portraits of what he is actually missing in his regular life, which is precisely the sense of belonging and consequence that the mob, for all its criminality, provides its members. He cannot stay because the show cannot allow him to stay, and because the mob life's consequences eventually extend to his family in ways that the show uses to motivate his exit. But the appeal is real. And the appeal is an implicit critique of everything Springfield's legitimate institutions fail to provide to people like Homer. The mob works, in the sense of providing what it promises to provide, in a way that the nuclear plant and the school and the police department and the civic government consistently fail to do for Springfield's ordinary residents. Fat Tony's son, Michael, introduced in a later season as a character who complicates the generational transmission of the mob life, opens up a dimension of the Fat Tony mythology that the show addresses briefly and then largely drops. Michael does not want to be in the mob. He is a sensitive child, interested in art and gentleness and the kind of life that the criminal underworld is not particularly designed to accommodate. His father loves him. His father is also, by profession and by deep personal identity, the obstacle to his son's development in the direction his son actually wants to go. This is the mob dynasty version of the Krusty Rabbi Krustovsky dynamic. A father who loves his son but whose entire life is organized around a path that his son cannot follow. A generational conflict between what the father is and what the son wants to become, with the father's institutional identity representing the obstacle. The show handles this with more sympathy for both parties than you might expect. Fat Tony's love for his son is genuine and depicted as such. His inability to release his son from the gravitational pull of the family enterprise is not cruelty. It is the specific blindness that people who have organized their entire identity around a structure develop toward the ways that structure constrains the people they love. He cannot see what his life costs his son because his life is the only life he knows how to value. This is Springfield's pattern again, in criminal underworld form. The system reproduces itself across generations not through force, primarily, but through the inability of the people inside it to fully imagine alternatives. The Springfield mob's most significant institutional function, beyond its shadow economy operations, is what it provides to Springfield's social fabric in terms of enforcement. Burns's institutional power operates through economic and political mechanisms. The mob provides a parallel enforcement system that operates in the spaces Burns's mechanisms cannot reach. When Springfield residents have conflicts that cannot be resolved through official channels, because official channels are corrupt or inaccessible or simply inadequate, the mob's enforcement capacity provides a resolution mechanism. This is how criminal organizations sustain themselves in communities with weak or corrupt institutional infrastructure. They fill the gap. They provide, at a cost, services that the official institutions have failed to provide. Fat Tony is filling a gap that Burns' operation created. The institutional corruption that protects Burns from accountability also makes the police department unavailable for the ordinary conflicts and needs of Springfield's non-elite residents. And into that gap, inevitably, something moves. In Springfield, what moved in was Fat Tony. He is, in this reading, not an anomaly in Springfield's institutional landscape. He is a logical consequence of it. The mob exists because the official institutions have been compromised in ways that leave real needs unserved, and those real needs will be served, one way or another, by whatever fills the available space. Springfield's invisible criminal underworld is invisible primarily because Springfield's residents have adjusted to its existence in the same way they have adjusted to everything else that should be alarming. It is part of the environment. It is part of the air. It is as present and as unremarked upon as the radiation coming from the cracked cooling towers and the corruption running through the police department and the 3 eyes on the fish in the river. Fat Tony has lunch at Olive Garden. The wine is probably good, and nobody in Springfield is going to ask him to explain himself, because the people who would ask are the people he has arrangements with, and the people who do not have arrangements with him are the people who cannot afford to make enemies. That is Springfield's criminal underworld, not hidden in the shadows. Sitting at the best table, ordering the pasta, enjoying the view of a town that has decided, through accumulated institutional failure, that this is simply how things are. It is, and it always will be, until something changes. And in Springfield, things do not change. The show has been making that argument for 36 years, from every angle, through every character, in every format from domestic comedy to horror anthology to this, the long, quiet, patient examination of a fictional town that contains more truth than it is comfortable to acknowledge. Springfield is Springfield. The mob is there. Burns is there. The school is failing. The plant is leaking. The police are compromised. The DMV workers are watching everything. The clown is performing emptiness. The baby is waiting to speak. And Marge has the kitchen light on and the blue hair up, and she is paying attention to all of it. And the show is still running, and we are still watching. And maybe that is the final mystery. Not what is wrong with Springfield, not who shot Burns, or whether Homer is dreaming, or how much Patty and Selma actually know, or what Maggie is waiting for. The final mystery is why we keep coming back. Why, after 36 years and 788 episodes and all the evidence that Springfield is a broken place that does not want to be fixed and cannot be fixed anyway, because the fixing would require admitting what broke it, why we sit down every Sunday and go back. Maybe because Springfield is not a warning, maybe it is a mirror. And the people we see in it, Homer falling down, Marge holding everything together, Bart refusing to submit, Lisa refusing to stop caring, Maggie watching it all with those enormous patient eyes, they are not characters in a cartoon. They are us. They are the American family. They are what it looks like to love something and damage it simultaneously. To live inside a system you know is broken, and to keep living inside it anyway because the alternative, actually seeing what the system costs, and actually doing something about it, requires a kind of courage that Springfield was always designed to make impossible. The show does not end. The loop keeps floating, and we keep watching. That is Springfield. That is the mystery. That is the answer. The disconnect between Apu's education and his employment is something the show revisits across multiple episodes without ever fully resolving. But the specific nature of his doctorate, computer science from the California Institute of Technology, carries additional weight in the context of the time period in which he would have been studying. Apu's timeline, pieced together from various episode references, places his graduate education in the late 1980s. This is the period immediately before the internet became publicly accessible, the period when the foundational work for virtually everything that defines the modern digital economy was being done at exactly the kinds of institutions Apu attended. The people who got computer science doctorates from Caltech in the late 1980s went on to build the infrastructure of the world that came after. The alternative history of Apu Nahasapi Mapetalon, in which he did not end up in Springfield, in which his immigration status was resolved before it forced him behind a convenience store counter, in which the specific circumstances of his life had been slightly different, is a history in which he might be among the architects of the digital age, rather than the man who knows every Springfield resident by their purchasing habits. This is not a reading the show offers directly, but it is the reading that his credential implies, and the gap between the credential and the outcome is larger when you apply that context than the show's comedy framing suggests. He is also, it should be noted, a man who has spent 36 years managing a complex supply chain, maintaining a 24-hour operation with minimal staff, handling inventory, cash management, customer relations, regulatory compliance, and the endless practical problem-solving that keeping a convenience store operational requires. These are not trivial skills. In the real world, the operational capacity that Apu has demonstrated across 3 decades of quick e-mart management would be recognized as entrepreneurial competence of a significant order. The comedy presents this as the consolation prize, the small competence that substitutes for the big career he should have had. But it is not nothing. It is, in fact, considerable. And Apu knows this. He is not deceived about the value of what he does. He is aware, probably more clearly than any other character in Springfield, of exactly what his life contains and what it does not contain, and he has made something like peace with the ratio. The peace is not resignation. It is a specific kind of clarity that comes from having examined your situation long enough and with enough intelligence to understand it fully. Apu understands his situation. That understanding does not change the situation, but it changes what the situation means to him, in ways that the comedy frame translates as cheerfulness but that are, underneath, something more complex. He is a man who chose, or who was chosen by circumstances that left him effectively without choice, to invest his intelligence in something smaller than his training prepared him for. And he has invested it fully. The Quickie Mart, in Apu's hands, is as well run as a convenience store can be in a town that is trying, in various ways, to destroy itself. He has made it what the show has always presented it as, the most reliable institution in Springfield. Not the most powerful, not the most important, the most reliable. In a town built on unreliability, on broken promises and failed institutions, and the accumulated weight of neglected obligations, the thing that is always open, always there, always stocked with the products people need, even if those products are sometimes of questionable vintage, is not a small thing. It is, in its way, an act of sustained commitment to the community that produced nothing equivalent in return. Apu keeps the lights on at the Quickie Mart. The lights at the nuclear plant are on, technically, but they are powered by a system that is slowly poisoning the town. The lights at the Quickie Mart are on because Apu has kept them on, every night for 36 years. That is the thing the show never quite says. But it is there in every episode where the Quick E-Mart neon sign glows in Springfield's night air, and Homer goes in for a squishy, and Apu knows his name. There is a question that the show has positioned Lisa to ask for 36 seasons, and that the show has never allowed her to ask. Not because the writers do not know the question, because the question, if asked and answered, would change everything. The question is, who benefits from the school being this way? Lisa has the intelligence to ask this. She has the intellectual framework, assembled from her voracious reading and her genuine academic engagement with the social sciences, to understand that institutional failures of the systematic, sustained kind that Springfield Elementary exhibits are not accidents. Systematic failures have systematic causes, and systematic causes serve someone's interest, or they would be addressed. She asks about the environment. She asks about Burns. She asks about Springfield's civic dysfunction in a general way that the show allows, and that produces episodes where her advocacy positions her against the town's inertia. But she has never, in 36 seasons, directed the specific, pointed question at her own school in the form that would reveal its actual function. Why not? The show's practical answer is that Lisa, for all her intelligence and all her advocacy, is still a child. She has not developed the framework of institutional analysis that would allow her to see beyond the individual failures, beyond Skinner's particular inadequacies and Krabappel's particular cynicism, to the structural function that those individual failures serve. She is brilliant. She is not yet old enough, or sufficiently equipped by experience, to think structurally rather than individually about the problems she observes. But there is another answer, the one that the darker readings of the show make available. Lisa has been in Springfield Elementary long enough, has absorbed enough of its implicit curriculum to have internalized certain limitations on what questions are appropriate to ask. Not consciously, Springfield Elementary does not explicitly teach its students to avoid questions that threaten institutional stability. But the environment produces that outcome through the accumulated weight of non-responses, of questions asked and deflected, of advocacy that produces momentary acknowledgement and then resumes the status quo. Lisa has learned, through 36 years of experience, that certain questions in Springfield produce certain outcomes, which is to say, no outcome at all. She keeps asking anyway because the show requires her to keep asking, because she is the character who asks. But the cumulative effect of those questions producing nothing has shaped, at some level, that the comedy framing makes difficult to see, the scope of the questions she asks. She is still asking. She will keep asking. That is what Lisa does, and the show honors this about her more fully than it honors almost anything else in its long run. But the question she has not yet asked, the structural question about who benefits from her school's failure, remains unasked. And the answer, if she ever reaches it, would place her in direct conflict with the system that has shaped her entire life. The show cannot go there. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But Lisa is 8 years old, and brilliant, and curious, and entirely capable of arriving, in the direction she is already heading, at a question that would change Springfield if anyone in Springfield were capable of hearing the answer. She is still heading there. That is the most dangerous thing about her. She is still heading there. Marge Simpson wants, very specifically, to be normal. This desire is so persistent and so clearly articulated across the show's run that it functions as a defining character trait, as central to her as Homer's appetite or Bart's rebellion or Lisa's intelligence. She wants to be a normal family. She wants to do normal things. She wants Springfield to see the Simpsons as ordinary, decent people doing ordinary, decent things. This desire is frustrated constantly. The Simpsons are not a normal family in any sense that Springfield's social expectations accommodate. Homer's disasters are public and spectacular. Bart's behavior is a civic event. Lisa's intelligence is socially disruptive in the specific way that significant intelligence is always disruptive in social environments not designed to accommodate it. Maggie shot a man. The family is, by any reasonable measure, the opposite of the unobtrusive normalcy that Marge wants. But here is the mystery in Marge's relationship with normalcy. She does not actually want it. Or she wants it, genuinely. But the part of her that wants it is not the largest or the deepest part. Consider what a truly normal life would require. It would require Homer to be different. It would require Bart to be different. It would require the family to stop generating the particular kind of chaotic energy that makes them who they are. And in the episodes where the show imagines this, where it depicts Marge getting closer to the normal surface she claims to want, something in her response reveals that the normalcy is not entirely what she thought it would be. She is genuinely bored. The word is too simple for what the show depicts, but it is the baseline. Marge in a functional, drama-free environment is a woman whose considerable intelligence and emotional capacity have no adequate outlet. Her management of Homer's disasters is not just burden. It is, in some way the show makes difficult to acknowledge directly, the thing that makes full use of her capabilities. The disaster management, the emotional labor, the constant navigation of the impossible situation that is the Simpson family is the thing that calls on everything she has. A normal life would not call on everything she has. It would call on a fraction of it. And the fraction left uncalled would accumulate, like water with nowhere to go, into something that the comfortable surface of normalcy would not be adequate to contain. Marge's blue hair points up. It does not settle into normalcy. It cannot. And maybe that is not the radiation. Not entirely. Not in the way the radiation theory claims it. Maybe the hair points up because something in Marge has always pointed up, has always refused to settle into the flat, horizontal plane of the normal life she says she wants. She is not a normal person who found herself in an abnormal situation and has been managing the gap ever since. She is a person whose extraordinary internal life has found, in the chaos of the Simpson family, something that matches its scale. The disasters and the crises and the impossible recoveries are not tragedies in Marge's story. They are the environment in which she is fully herself. She would never say this. The show would never say it for her directly, but it is visible in 36 seasons of a woman who complains about normalcy's absence while demonstrating, every time normalcy approaches, that it is not where she lives. The kitchen light stays on because someone in the Simpson house is always awake, always managing, always navigating. And that someone is Marge. And she is not doing it in spite of her situation. She is doing it in the way that people do the thing they were made for. Whatever Marge was made for, it is not the quiet life she describes wanting. It is this, and she knows it, in the way that people know the things about themselves that they have not found the language for yet. The Treehouse of Horror episodes have collectively produced what is, when you view them as a unified body of work rather than as individual annual specials, a parallel canon for The Simpsons that is more honest about the show's emotional content than the regular episodes are. In the regular episodes, Springfield is hard but manageable. Things go wrong and then they go right, or at least they reset, which is a kind of rightness in the Springfield context. The emotional register is bounded by the comedy format. Horror, even the comedic horror of the Treehouse episodes, has a different relationship to emotional truth. It permits extremity. It permits the acknowledgement of things that the comedy format requires to be softened or deflected. The deaths in the Treehouse episodes are real deaths. Not in the sense of having canonical consequences, because the Treehouse format explicitly cancels consequences, but in the sense of being depicted with enough specificity and enough emotional weight that the audience feels them in the moment of their occurring. Homer dies. Bart dies. Marge dies. The family is destroyed, over and over, in increasingly creative ways, and the show expects the audience to feel something in each destruction even while knowing that the reset is coming. What the audience feels in those moments is the thing the regular format suppresses, the actual stakes of the Simpson family's situation, the actual fragility of the bonds that the show depicts as indestructible, the actual cost of the disasters and the crises, and the impossibilities that the regular format processes through comedy. The Treehouse episodes say, this is what it would actually feel like if these things actually happened, and then they reset. And the regular episodes resume, and the comedy absorbs the disasters, and the family survives everything. But the Treehouse canon has been building, episode by episode, year by year, an emotional truth that sits underneath the regular show's comedy surface. The truth that love is fragile, that family is fragile, that the things we protect most carefully are the things that can hurt us most deeply. That Springfield is, underneath its comedy and its radiation and its corrupt institutions and its collective denial, a place where people love each other and are trying to survive, and are often failing and are trying again. The horror in the Treehouse episodes is not external. It never has been. The aliens and the demons and the supernatural threats are projection screens onto which the show casts the internal horror of Springfield's actual situation. The horror of living in a contaminated town. The horror of a family where the father is cognitively impaired and the mother is managing everything alone and the children are growing up inside the loop and none of them can age their way out of it. The Treehouse of Horror is where The Simpsons goes when it needs to acknowledge what it actually is. And what it actually is, stripped of the comedy that makes it bearable, is a love story about a family that is trying very hard in circumstances that are specifically designed to make trying very hard not enough. The horror is that it is not enough. The reset is that it does not matter. They try again. The show continues, and we keep watching, because the love underneath the horror is real, even when everything else in Springfield is carefully, systematically false. Fat Tony's operation has, across the show's run, been involved in events that Springfield has subsequently forgotten with the same thoroughness that it forgets everything else. The mob-adjacent storylines in The Simpsons tend to resolve in ways that require a certain selective amnesia to function. The case is closed, the criminal is neutralized or allowed to escape, and Springfield moves on without the kind of institutional reckoning that actual organized crime activity would require. This pattern serves the same function as all of Springfield's collective forgetting. It allows the narrative to reset without requiring the show to sustain consequences that would change the fundamental situation. But in the mob storylines, there is an additional layer. The forgetting does not just serve the show's episodic structure, it serves Fat Tony's operation. A town that forgets that its organized crime figure was involved in specific events is a town that provides that organized crime figure with the same protective amnesia it provides to Burns and to Skinner and to every other power in its structure. The collective forgetting is not just about the Simpsons family. It is an institutional service that Springfield provides to all of its entrenched powers equally. Fat Tony benefits from this service. He has always benefited from it. The mob in Springfield does not just operate under the protection of a corrupt police department. It operates under the protection of a town-wide cognitive architecture that processes threatening information through the same mechanisms of denial and comfortable forgetting that protect every uncomfortable truth in Springfield. This means that whatever Fat Tony has done in Springfield, across 36 years of off-screen operation and occasional on-screen criminality, is not just legally unaddressed, it is socially unaddressed. There is no community memory of it. No accumulation of civic anxiety about his presence. No gradual erosion of trust in Springfield's institutions on his account that might eventually produce pressure for change. He exists in the clear, in exactly the way that Burns exists in the clear. Not because the evidence is absent, because the community cannot hold the evidence in mind long enough to do anything with it. Springfield resets. The mob benefits from the reset, just as it benefits from everything else that makes Springfield's institutional infrastructure a favorable environment for criminal enterprise. The last night Springfield never talks about is every night it has already forgotten, and there have been many, and there will be more. And Fat Tony will be at his usual table, enjoying the pasta when the forgetting has finished, and nothing will be different, and the lights at the Quick E-Mart will still be on. There is something that the show does with music that deserves its own section, and that has never quite been given one. The Simpsons has one of the most recognizable theme songs in television history. Danny Elfman's composition is immediately identifiable, globally famous, and has been heard by more human beings than almost any other piece of music composed for television. It is the sonic signature of Springfield, and its character, the bouncy, slightly strange, simultaneously childlike and mildly unsettling quality of it, mirrors Springfield's visual aesthetic with a precision that suggests it was designed to carry the same ambiguity that the animation does. The theme is catchy. It is also slightly off. It sounds like something a child would enjoy and that an adult would find, on close attention, a little wrong. Not wrong enough to name. Just slightly misaligned with what you expect major key upbeat television theme music to do. The melody goes to places that straightforward children's entertainment would not go. It suggests depth that the opening visuals, with their satirical tour of Springfield's chaos, reinforce and extend. But the theme is not the only music that shapes Springfield's emotional landscape. The show has always used music deliberately, both through its original compositions and through its deployment of popular and classical music across episodes in ways that are so precisely chosen that they constitute a form of commentary independent of the dialogue and action. The episode where the opera plays over Homer's coma vigil, the folk song that accompanies Mona Simpson's backstory, the jazz that characterizes Lisa's inner life, the bluegrass that surfaces in certain Homer episodes about his roots, the Christmas songs that accompany the holiday episodes with a sentimentality that the show earns through the genuine emotional weight it places around them. Music in The Simpsons is not incidental, it is structural. And the music that is most structurally important is the music that the characters themselves make. Lisa's saxophone is the show's most consistent musical motif. She plays it throughout the series, in moments of joy and moments of sorrow and moments of something in between. The saxophone is Lisa's primary mode of self-expression in a household and a town that does not always have the vocabulary for what she is feeling. When she cannot find words adequate to what she is experiencing, she plays. And the playing, in the show's depiction, says something that the dialogue cannot. The saxophone scenes are among the most emotionally precise moments in the entire show. The music that Lisa plays in these scenes is not random. It has been chosen, or composed, to correspond to the emotional state the episode has established. The music is honest in a way that the dialogue, managed as all dialogue is by the comedy format's requirements, sometimes cannot be. Lisa is, in this reading, the show's musical truth-teller, in the same way that she is the character who asks the uncomfortable questions that the comedy format otherwise manages. She is also the character whose musical expression accesses emotional registers that the dialogue and action are too bounded to reach. She plays past the boundaries of what the show can otherwise say, and Springfield, characteristically, does not listen closely enough. Bart plays the guitar. This is established in certain episodes with a casualness that the show does not develop into a sustained narrative. He is good. He is better than the show bothers to explore. He picked up the instrument with the same ease he picks up most things that genuinely interest him, which is to say quickly and completely, before the school or the household or Springfield's general expectations had a chance to categorize it as a failing and redirect his attention elsewhere. What might Bart become as a musician, in a world that recognized and cultivated what he is actually capable of? The show has occasionally glimpsed this, in the same way it occasionally glimpses what Bart is capable of academically. It glimpses it and then lets the glimpse dissolve back into the familiar characterization of Bart as the troublemaker, as the bad student, as the kid who is not quite right. The music he plays in those glimpse moments sounds like the music of someone who has found a language for the things he cannot otherwise express. The rebellion and the frustration and the love and the restlessness and the specific Bart energy that the show has been channeling into pranks and into resistance for 36 years. If the pranks are Bart's primary language, the music is his second and possibly his truer one. The one that does not need anyone to get hurt for the communication to happen. The one that does not require an audience to be fooled or an authority to be defied. Just Bart and an instrument and the thing he is trying to say. He does not play often. The show does not give him many opportunities. But when he plays, something is visible that the rest of the series, in all its chaos and comedy, does not always make room for. Bart Simpson, underneath everything, is trying to say something. He has been trying to say it for 36 years. And some nights, in the Springfield that exists between the episodes, when the animation cell is still and the dialogue has stopped and nothing is required of him by the show's structure, he picks up the guitar and plays. And for a moment, Springfield is quiet, and something honest moves through it, carried on the music of a 10-year-old boy who has been 10 years old for longer than most people have been alive, playing the thing he cannot say in a town that has never quite figured out how to listen. That is the music of Springfield. That is the thing underneath the familiar theme song and the celebrity guest performances and the parody musical numbers and the Homer singing in the shower. The thing underneath all of it is a child playing an honest note in an honest key, in a town that is not always honest about anything. It is enough. It has always been enough. Even if nobody is listening, there is a version of Springfield that the show has depicted across its run in fragments. The Springfield before the nuclear plant. The Springfield before Burns. The Springfield that existed as a small American town in the years before the specific decisions were made that turned it into the contaminated, institutionally compromised, collectively amnesiac community the show has been depicting for 36 years. The fragments appear in historical episodes, in backstory glimpses, in the rare moments when older characters describe what Springfield was before the show's present-day setting. They are inconsistent, because the floating timeline makes consistency impossible. The Springfield of 40 years ago looks different depending on which episode is doing the looking. But the fragments share a tone. The pre-industrial Springfield that these glimpses suggest is not a paradise. It is not an ideal that the current Springfield has fallen from. It is simply different, smaller, more limited, less catastrophically broken in the specific ways that nuclear contamination and institutional corruption break a community. It had its own problems. Small-town American life in the mid-20th century was not universally pleasant, and the show acknowledges this when it bothers to look carefully. There was poverty. There was social exclusion. There were the ordinary and extraordinary failures of human community that existed before Burns and will exist after him. But there was not the three-eyed fish. There was not the collective cognitive impairment. There was not the systematic environmental contamination that the radiation theory identifies as the root cause of Springfield's most distinctive features. The people of that earlier Springfield were, as far as the show's fragments allow us to determine, physically unremarkable, four-fingered and yellow, because that is how the show draws everyone, but without the specific features that the mutation theory attributes to decades of nuclear exposure. They were ordinary. Ordinary in the way that Springfield's current residents have not been, for a very long time. What happened to that Springfield when the plant arrived? The show has not addressed this directly, except in the way the town's collective memory functions, which is to say that it has been forgotten. The Springfield before Burns is not part of Springfield's operative cultural memory. It is not a touchstone of civic identity. It is not the thing that local historians preserve or that old-timers reference when they describe what the town used to be. It has been absorbed into the general amnesia. The Springfield that existed before the plant, before Burns, before whatever the town's founding moment is in the show's mythology, exists only in the fragments that the show occasionally surfaces without quite knowing what to do with. But it was there. It is, in some sense, still there, under all the accumulated weight of what followed. The basic human community of people living in proximity, managing the difficulties and the possibilities of shared life, finding ways to be neighbors. Springfield had that. Maybe it still has it, in the episodes where Flanders helps Homer and Homer helps Flanders, and the neighborhood functions the way neighborhoods sometimes function, through the specific generosity that proximity produces when the pressure is high enough and the need is clear enough. The Springfield that never was is also, in those moments, the Springfield that still occasionally appears, briefly, between catastrophes. In the space before the reset, it is enough. Homer's dream is a version of it. Marge's kitchen light is a version of it. Lisa's saxophone is a version of it. Bart's guitar. Maggie's enormous patient eyes. The Springfield that never was is the Springfield they are all, in their various and imperfect ways, trying to get back to, even though they cannot. Even though the plant is still there and Burns is still there and the water is still compromised and the institutions are still broken, they are still trying. Across 788 episodes, across 36 years, through every catastrophe and every reset and every impossible recovery and every moment that should be the end and is not the end. The Simpson family is still on Evergreen Terrace. The light in the kitchen is on, and whatever Springfield was before it became what it is, something of it persists in the people who live there, who love each other, who keep getting up in the morning and trying again. The show does not end because the trying does not end. And the trying does not end because the thing they are trying to preserve, the ordinary, imperfect, chaotic, loving life of a family in a house in a town, is worth preserving. Even here, even in Springfield. Maybe especially in Springfield, where everything is trying to make it impossible. It persists anyway. That is the final word on Springfield. Not the radiation, not the corruption, not the coma or the conspiracy or the collective amnesia. The family, still there, still trying, still loving each other, badly and imperfectly, and in the specific ways that the Simpson family loves, which is to say with everything they have, every week, forever. That is Springfield. That is the mystery, the answer, the loop, and the reason nobody can stop watching. The kitchen light is on. There is a phenomenon that happens in Springfield that the show depicts so consistently across so many episodes and so many storylines that it should be one of the most discussed elements of the show's mythology. Instead, it is so normalized within the show's viewing experience that it rarely gets discussed at all. Springfield forgets. Not Homer specifically, though Homer's individual memory is itself a documented clinical phenomenon given the crayon lodged in his brain and the radiation and the repeated head trauma. The entire town forgets, collectively, simultaneously, with a completeness that is, when you look at it clearly, physiologically impossible in a normal population. The Springfield Dome. The EPA classified the entire town as an environmental hazard. The United States government physically enclosed Springfield under a massive containment structure. This happened. The show depicted it explicitly, in its most ambitious and most widely seen production, the feature film. Every resident of Springfield experienced this event. They were inside the dome. They interacted with it. They developed relationships and made decisions and changed their lives in response to it. The next episode after the film's events takes place in a Springfield that has no dome, no reference to the dome, no lingering civic discussion about the experience of having been classified as a federal containment zone. The dome happened. Springfield forgot. Not the audience. The audience remembers. But Springfield itself has processed the dome event through whatever mechanism Springfield uses to process everything that would, if remembered, require a confrontation with the town's actual situation. The mechanism is the interesting thing, because a real population experiencing a real event of that magnitude would not forget it. The psychological literature on collective trauma is consistent on this point. Communities do not forget major events. They process them, sometimes well, sometimes extremely poorly, but the events remain in collective memory. They shape civic discourse. They inform political decisions. They generate cultural responses. They persist. Springfield's events do not persist. They occur. They are vivid and present during the episode that contains them, and then they are gone. The next episode begins in the same Springfield, with the same characters, doing the same things, as though the previous event had not altered the landscape. This is the floating timeline at the episodic level. Not just the aging freeze, not just the rewriting of backstory, but the event-level amnesia that allows Springfield to experience catastrophe after catastrophe without accumulating any of it into a coherent picture of what is happening to the town. Why does this happen? The show provides several frameworks, which we have explored in various forms throughout this journey through Springfield. The coma theory says the dream resets between cycles because a brain generating a sustained dream cannot maintain perfect narrative continuity across all of its events. The radiation theory says the cognitive damage from chronic nuclear exposure specifically compromises the neural mechanisms responsible for integrating traumatic memory into long-term storage. The Tamzarian principle, the social contract of collective amnesia, says the town chooses to forget because remembering is too dangerous. But there is a fourth explanation that none of the other theories quite captures, and it is the most uncomfortable one. Springfield forgets because it is designed to forget. Not by Burns, specifically, though Burns benefits enormously from the forgetting. Not by any single conspirator, though the system that produces the forgetting serves the interests of Springfield's most powerful residents so precisely that the design hypothesis is difficult to dismiss. Springfield forgets because the experience of being in Springfield, of drinking its water and breathing its air, and living inside its institutional structures, has produced in its residents a relationship to time and memory that is fundamentally different from what a normal population experiences. This is not a metaphor. This is a literal claim about what chronic low-level neurotoxic exposure does to human memory function. The medical literature on chronic environmental toxic exposure and cognitive function is consistent. Neurological systems responsible for memory consolidation are among the most sensitive to environmental toxins. Chronic exposure at levels that do not produce dramatic acute symptoms can, over years and decades, selectively impair the mechanisms by which short-term memory is integrated into long-term storage. What this produces, in a population chronically exposed to the specific cocktail of industrial byproducts that the Springfield nuclear plant has been emitting for 36 years, is exactly what the show depicts. Events are experienced fully in the moment. The immediate memory of the event is vivid and present, but the consolidation of that event into the kind of durable long-term memory that would allow it to accumulate, to connect to other events, to build into the coherent picture of what is happening to Springfield that should be visible to anyone paying attention, is impaired. Springfield experiences the dome. Springfield does not remember the dome, not because it chose to forget, because the neural architecture that would allow the town's residents to remember, in the deep way that produces lasting behavioral change, has been damaged by 36 years of exposure to the thing that put them inside the dome in the first place. The plant is not just polluting the water. It is not just mutating the biology. It is not just producing the three-eyed fish and the four-fingered hands and the yellow skin. It is compromising the cognitive apparatus that would allow Springfield's residents to understand and respond to what is being done to them. Burns's most effective weapon is not the nuclear plant's economic dominance, or its political influence, or the corrupted institutions that protect it from accountability. Burns's most effective weapon is what the plant has done to Springfield's ability to remember. You cannot hold someone accountable for events that the affected population cannot consistently remember. You cannot build a civic movement around a pattern that the participants cannot track because each individual event dissolves before the next one can be connected to it. You cannot change a system that the people inside it experience as a series of disconnected events rather than as the sustained, systematic, deliberate operation it actually is. Springfield's amnesia is Burns's most complete and most effective tool of control. And the beautiful, terrible irony of it is that it does not require any active maintenance. The plant does the work. The radiation does the work. The cognitive impairment that the show depicts as a background feature of Springfield's population is, in this reading, the most sophisticated and most durable mechanism of social control that any fictional villain has ever deployed. He does not need to suppress the memory. The plant suppresses it for him. He just has to keep it running. And Homer is there to make sure it keeps running. Homer, whose cognitive impairment is the most severe in the town because his exposure is the most direct, whose brain was already compromised by the crayon, before the decades of reactor-adjacent employment compounded the damage, whose job is specifically to prevent the kind of safety oversight that might draw attention to what the plant is doing. The deepest conspiracy in Springfield is not a conspiracy at all. It is physics. It is neurochemistry. It is the simple, terrible mechanism of a toxin acting on a population of biological systems that had no defense against it and no warning that it was coming. And 36 years later, Springfield is still there, still forgetting, still experiencing each catastrophe as though it is the first. Still surprised when the fish have 3 eyes. Still unable to hold the picture together long enough to see what the picture is. The dome was real. Springfield forgot. The dome will never be the last thing, and Springfield will forget that too. Bart Simpson has a future. The show has depicted it, briefly, in the same way it has depicted Lisa's future. In flash-forward episodes that provide glimpses of who these characters might become before the floating timeline reasserts itself and returns everyone to their permanent, present-tense positions. Bart's futures are consistently darker than Lisa's. Lisa's flash-forwards, from the famous Season 6 episode forward, show a woman who has become, with effort and difficulty and considerable personal cost, something close to the person her intelligence and her values were always pointing toward. She is incomplete. She is lonely in ways that her accomplishments do not address. But she has become a version of herself that represents genuine development. Bart's flash-forwards show someone who has struggled with the development that Lisa has managed to achieve. The adult Bart, who appears in various speculative episodes, is a man in the early stages of becoming his father, carrying the specific weight of a life spent in the pattern-breaking role that Springfield never rewarded and that the school never knew how to channel into productive form. He is not exactly Homer. The intelligence is more visible, the self-awareness is slightly more present, but the trajectory, the accumulation of small surrenders to what Springfield offers, rather than what Bart might have made of himself in a different environment, is visible. This is the show's most honest and most painful future glimpse, not the alien invasion scenarios of the Treehouse episodes. The quiet future Bart who did not quite become what the show's most emotionally engaged viewers wanted for him, because Springfield and its specific set of institutional failures intervened between who Bart was at 10 and who Bart might have become at 40. The question the show does not directly ask about Bart's future is whether the man he is becoming has accepted what Springfield made of him, or whether some part of him is still resisting, still looking for the window that the environment closed and that he has not stopped trying to find. Still pulling pranks at 40 in the same way he pulled them at 10, not because he has not grown, but because the prank, the resistance, the refusal to simply accept the structures around him, is the one thing that Springfield has never quite managed to take from him. Bart's rebellion is not a phase, it is a value. It is the closest thing to a principled position that the show ever allows him, and the fact that it is expressed in the form of pranks and chaos rather than in the form of organized resistance does not make it less real. It makes it the specific Springfield-shaped form that resistance takes in a town that is very good at making organized resistance impossible. He keeps going. That is the thing. In every future glimpse, in every flash forward, in every version of Bart that the show has imagined, he is still going, still resistant, still unwilling to completely settle into the shape that Springfield has always been trying to press him into. He is still 10 years old. He is still going to be 10 years old when the next episode begins. The future where he is something else, where the resistance either produced change or was finally defeated, is not the Simpsons' future. It is a hypothetical, a thought experiment, a what-if. But the what-if matters, because Bart's future, the one the show does not depict, is the most honest test of what Springfield does to the people who resist it. Does resistance eventually produce something different? Does it matter, in the long arc of a life lived in Springfield, that Bart never stopped pushing? The show cannot answer this. The floating timeline prevents the question from being fully asked. Bart is 10. He will be 10. The future is always hypothetical. But here, in this long space between the episodes, in the hours of quiet exploration that this script has been building, we can sit with the question. We can imagine Bart at 40, still going, still finding windows and structures that are built to have no windows, still the one person in Springfield who is not quite willing to accept that the loop is all there is. Maybe that is enough. Maybe resistance, sustained over a lifetime, even without dramatic resolution, is its own kind of answer to what Springfield is. Maybe the fact that Bart keeps pushing, that Lisa keeps asking, that Marge keeps the light on, that Maggie keeps watching, that Homer keeps finding his way home to the family he loves even when his brain is barely functional enough to navigate the route? Maybe the persistence is the answer. Not to the radiation, not to the corruption, not to the institutional failures and the collective amnesia and the three-eyed fish and the man who glows in the dark. The persistence does not answer those. They remain. They will remain. But to the question of what makes the Springfield of The Simpsons something more than the sum of its failures, the answer might be exactly this. They persist. They love each other. They keep trying. And the show, across 788 episodes and 36 years, and every mystery and every contradiction and every impossible thing that happens in that impossible town, keeps pointing at this as the thing that matters. The town is broken. The family is still there. Both of those things are true simultaneously, and they will both be true when the next episode begins, and neither of them cancels the other out. Springfield endures. Not because it is good, not because its problems are resolved, not because the radiation has been cleaned up, or Burns has been held accountable, or the police department has been reformed, or the school has started actually educating its students, or any of the things that would have to happen for Springfield to become a healthy community have happened. It endures because the people in it keep showing up. Every week, every episode. Still yellow, still four-fingered, still living in a town that is classified by the federal government as an environmental containment zone, still watching Krusty's show and shopping at the Quickie Mart and driving past the nuclear plant on the way to the church and the school and the bar and the home. Still home, still Springfield, still the family on Evergreen Terrace. That is the final mystery of Springfield and the final answer to every mystery. The town is what it is, and the people in it are still there. And we are still watching, wherever you are, whatever time it is where you are watching this, whenever this found you. Springfield is still there, the kitchen light is on, the couch is waiting, and the Simpsons will be back next week. Before we close, there are several smaller mysteries and smaller characters who deserve attention, not because they carry the weight of the major theories, but because they are part of the texture of Springfield that makes the place feel like somewhere that has been lived in. Accumulated, built up by time and habit, and the specific accumulation of detail that only happens when a show runs long enough to develop genuine depth. Professor Frink is Springfield's scientist. He is the man with the credentials, the laboratory, the formal academic training in the physical sciences that should, in any functional civic environment, place him at the center of whatever responses the town's scientific problems require. He is brilliant. His inventions work, when they work, at levels of sophistication that would be genuinely revolutionary if anyone in Springfield cared enough to engage with them seriously. Nobody does. Professor Frink exists in the margins of Springfield's civic life in the same way that all of Springfield's actually capable people exist in its margins. He invents. He warns. He provides technical analysis of situations that the town needs technical analysis of, including the environmental situation that the radiation theory would make him the most important voice on. And Springfield listens to him with the same interested indifference it brings to every expert voice that threatens to produce a conclusion requiring action. The Frink episodes, when the show develops them with real attention, are some of its most effective portraits of the specific isolation that genuine competence produces in an environment that does not value it. He is not bitter exactly. He is something more specific. A man who has made peace with the gap between what he can do and what Springfield will allow him to do about anything, and who continues working anyway because the work is the thing. And the work does not require Springfield's cooperation to be the work. He makes his inventions. He presents them. Springfield is briefly impressed and then distracted. And then the invention's potential goes unrealized, and Frink goes back to the laboratory. He is, in miniature, Lisa's trajectory completed. The intelligent person who persisted in Springfield long enough to make peace with what persistence in Springfield actually means. He is what Lisa might become, if the show were willing to let her become anything. A person who kept trying and kept caring about the right things and who found, eventually, a way to sustain that caring in an environment that could not quite kill it but could not quite let it produce anything either. That is not a small thing. In Springfield, it is one of the largest things. Then there is Hans Moleman, whose repeated deaths we have already discussed in the context of other theories, but who deserves a moment more in this final survey of Springfield's marginal figures. What is Hans Moleman's daily life like between the deaths? This causation the show is interested in, because Moleman exists primarily to provide the deaths, but 36 years of a character who dies and returns and dies again without the deaths becoming his defining experience in any accumulated way suggests a relationship to existence that the show has never directly addressed. Moleman experiences each death, presumably, as final. He does not know that he is going to come back. He does not have the viewer's knowledge that the next episode will restore him. Each time he is struck by a car, or falls from a height, or is consumed by an animal or crushed by an object, he is experiencing what he has every reason to believe is his last moment. And then he wakes up again, in the next episode, without memory of what happened, presumably, because if he remembered each death, he would be the most psychologically damaged character in a show full of psychologically damaged characters. He would be functioning under the accumulated weight of dozens of deaths, each one experienced as final, each one followed by a return that defies every expectation his experience had established. But he does not appear to be carrying that weight. He shows up, ready to be Moleman again, ready to do whatever the next episode needs him to do, apparently unburdened by the experience of having died multiple times in the preceding narrative. The radiation theory would explain this as biological reset. Whatever force allows him to return from death also clears the experiential memory of the deaths. The coma theory would explain it as a dream character whose continuity is not maintained between Homer's sleep cycles. The Tamsarian principle would explain it as Springfield's collective agreement to treat Moleman's existence as normal, which includes treating his returns as unremarkable and his deaths as events that happen in the background rather than events that require civic response. But the reading that stays with you after you have sat with it is the simple one. Hans Moleman is 31 years old and looks 70. He has been dying and returning for 36 years in a town that has never once sent an ambulance. He is the most vulnerable person in Springfield by any objective measure. He is the person the town most completely fails to protect. And he keeps showing up. He shows up because that is what you do. That is what Springfield teaches its residents, through the accumulated weight of everything it does and does not do for them. You show up. You get hurt. You come back. You show up again. The town does not protect you. The institutions do not serve you. The powerful do not notice you. And you keep showing up, because showing up is the only thing available to you. And you are still here, and here is still Springfield, and Springfield is still going. Hans Moleman is 31 years old, and he is the most purely Springfield character the show has ever produced. Not Homer with his disasters and his loves and his cognitive damage. Not Burns with his empire and his immortality and his treatments. Moleman, the man who keeps dying in the background and keeps coming back without fanfare or explanation or civic response. Who shows up to the next scene as though the last one did not end the way it did. He is, in his own specific way, the show's thesis. Stripped of all the larger characters and the major theories and the 36 years of mythology, here is what The Simpsons is actually about. You keep showing up. The town keeps failing you. You keep showing up anyway. Because Springfield is where you are, and where you are is home, and home does not have to be good to be home. It just has to be where you come back to. Moleman comes back every time, without explanation, without institutional support, without anyone checking on him. He comes back because Springfield is where he is, and where he is where he keeps waking up. That is Springfield. In 30 words, or in 36 years, that is the show. The Flanders family next door represents the road not taken. Not in the romantic sense that the show sometimes deploys, where Ned is the better version of Homer that Marge could have had if she had made different choices. In the structural sense. The Flanders family represents the version of Springfield life that happens when someone commits completely to the rules that the community nominally endorses, the values it claims to hold, the behavior patterns it theoretically rewards. Ned does everything right. He goes to church, he is kind to his neighbors, he maintains his property, he raises his children with care and genuine intention. He extends grace to Homer repeatedly, under circumstances where grace is not rationally warranted, because grace is what his faith instructs him to offer, and he has committed to his faith as thoroughly as he has committed to everything else. And the community does not reward this. The community takes it as its due and continues to fail Ned in ways that compound over time. Maud dies. The house is destroyed and rebuilt badly. Burns ignores him the way Burns ignores everyone without power. The school fails his children the way it fails everyone else's. The police department does not protect him any better than it protects anyone. The Flanders family is the control group in Springfield's experiment. They are the residents who followed the rules most faithfully, who internalized the community's stated values most completely, and who received from that community exactly what every other resident received, which is to say, the minimum necessary to sustain their continued participation, and not one thing more. This is not a sermon. The show does not present it as one, because the show does not believe in sermons and the characters are too complicated to serve as simple moral illustrations. But the structural fact is there, visible across 36 seasons of parallel Flanders Simpson storytelling. Being good in Springfield does not protect you from what Springfield does to everyone. The radiation does not respect virtue. The institutional corruption does not spare the faithful. The collective amnesia does not preserve the good deeds any more carefully than it preserves the bad ones. Ned keeps going. He keeps being Ned. Not because it works, in the sense of producing outcomes commensurate with the goodness invested, because it is who he is. Because the alternative, the thing underneath the behavioral conditioning, is something he has decided is worse than continuing to be Ned, and the decision was made a long time ago when he was a child in a psychiatrist's office and was not his to make. He is kind to Homer. Homer does not deserve it. Ned knows this. He is kind anyway, because that is what remains when the structures he was given to organize his life around are applied to the specific chaos that Homer Simpson introduces into every environment he occupies. It is not justice. The show has never claimed it is justice. It is just the thing that Ned does. And the thing that Ned does, unrewarded and largely unrecognized as exceptional by a town that is too busy managing its own radiation-compromised cognition to notice genuine goodness in its midst, is one of the longest and quietest acts of sustained grace in the history of American television. You can miss it if you are watching for the comedy. It is usually dressed as comedy. But it is there, next door to Homer, present for 36 years, continuing. Ned Flanders is the answer to a question Springfield never formally asks. The question is, can you remain yourself in a town that does everything possible to reshape you into something that serves its interests? His answer is yes, at tremendous personal cost, with the specific scarring that the behavioral conditioning of childhood has left on his psychology, with the accumulated grief of losses that the town has not adequately honored, with the persistent bewilderment of a man who has been doing things right for his entire life in an environment that has no mechanism for responding to that rightness. But yes, you can remain yourself. It costs everything. The town will not thank you. God will apparently not call. Homer will continue to Homer. And Ned will be next door. He will always be next door, waving from the driveway, offering to help. Being Ned with the same complete, exhausting, genuine commitment that he has always brought to being Ned. That is one of Springfield's mysteries too. How a man maintains himself in a place like that. What it takes, what it costs, whether the cost is worth the maintenance. Ned has decided it is. 36 years of deciding, every morning, again. And he is still there. He will be there tomorrow. Springfield has made harder things impossible, but it has not made Ned impossible. That is the strange, quiet, unremarked-upon miracle of the man at 744 Evergreen Terrace. He is still there, and tomorrow he will wave. The final note on Springfield's mysteries is the simplest one, and the one that everything else in this long tour of the town's stranger corners has been building toward. Every mystery in Springfield has the same answer, if you go deep enough into it. The answer is not Burns, though Burns is responsible for much. The answer is not the radiation, though the radiation is real. The answer is not the collective amnesia, or the floating timeline, or the coma, or the corruption, or the three-eyed fish. The answer is time. 36 years. 788 episodes. A show that has been running longer than most of its current audience has been alive, accumulating detail and history and contradiction and connection until the fictional town it depicts has become something that no single episode can contain, something that spills out of the frame in every direction, something that requires exactly the kind of long, patient, quiet exploration that this has been. Springfield is a place that has been given enough time to become real. Not in the literal sense. It is still a cartoon. The characters are still animated. The physics are still wrong. The geography is still impossible. But in the sense that matters for a fictional place, the sense in which a world becomes real by accumulating enough specific, irreducible, internally consistent detail to feel as though it existed before the camera found it and will continue to exist after the camera leaves, Springfield has become real. And real places have mysteries. Real places have histories. Real places have background characters with lives and institutions, with functions and power structures, with mechanisms and people who persist despite everything the environment throws at them. Springfield has all of these things. It has had them for 36 years. And every mystery embedded in this town is one more piece of evidence that the time spent making this show, the accumulated attention of hundreds of writers and animators and voice performers and production staff, has produced something that exceeds its original conception. Something that keeps generating mysteries because it has been made with enough care and enough specific attention that the mysteries are real. They are embedded in the work itself. They are waiting in the background of every episode for the viewer who looks past the comedy surface and asks the next question. The next question is always there. Springfield will always have another one ready. That is the last mystery of Springfield, and the most beautiful one. There is always more. Springfield is still there. The kitchen light is on. Good night.